The story of evolution begins long before any creature opened its eyes to witness the world, in a time when the planet itself was still shaping its identity. Picture Earth not as the stable refuge we know today, but as a restless sphere of oceans and fire, a place where continents were not yet fixed and the sky carried the scent of storms born from volcanic breath. In this shifting landscape, life did not appear with intention or ceremony. It flickered quietly into existence, almost as an accident, yet destined to shape the entire future of the planet. Evolution begins right here, not as a plan, but as a consequence of survival in a world that refused to remain still even for a moment. Across these primitive seas, time moved in ways that are difficult for us to imagine. Not in centuries or millennia, but in epochs, vast expanses of time where entire mountain ranges could rise and crumble while nothing more than microscopic organisms drifted through the water. But every minute, every tide, every shift in temperature nudged life toward change. This is the heart of evolution, not in sudden miracles, but in a slow dance with the conditions of the world. Life follows no script. It adapts, or it disappears. And from that simple truth, an entire planet of diversity would eventually bloom. Even in those early days, the struggle for existence was relentless. At first, the pressures were purely environmental, searing radiation from an unfiltered sun, violent storms, an atmosphere that would choke any modern living thing. But these pressures were also opportunities, subtle forces that pushed primitive organisms to develop new tricks for survival. A slightly stronger membrane. A more stable method of storing energy. The ability to cling to a surface rather than drift aimlessly. These tiny, almost invisible steps would ripple through the ages, shaping everything that came afterward. Evolution never stops, because the world never stops challenging life to be better, faster, more resilient. When we look back across 4 billion years of change, it's tempting to imagine evolution as a ladder, something that climbs upward toward complexity, toward intelligence, toward us. But that's not how it works. Evolution has no destination. It is a constant negotiation between organism and environment, a process that rewards anything that helps life persist, no matter how simple or strange. In this way, bacteria flourishing in boiling vents are just as successful as towering redwoods or soaring birds. Each is simply responding to its own pressures, rewriting its own story one mutation at a time. The wonder lies not in the direction of evolution, but in its endless capacity to experiment. As Earth stabilized and settled into long rhythms, day and night, season after season, ocean currents looping through the globe, life responded with new forms, new approaches. Some organisms embraced cooperation, forming colonies where the survival of one depended on the success of many. Others specialized in efficiency, mastering the art of splitting and reproducing at breakneck speed. This period was not dramatic in appearance, yet it was foundational. The rules of life were being written: adapt to heat, adapt to cold, find food, avoid destruction, reproduce before the world swallows you. These rules would remain unchanged even as life became unimaginably complex. Whether a single cell or a human being, the fundamentals are the same. But evolution is not only shaped by physical pressures. Chance plays just as powerful a role. A stray cosmic ray, a rare chemical interaction, a sudden shift in ocean salinity, each could alter the path of life forever. Some changes offered no advantage and vanished into oblivion. Others tipped the scale just enough for a lineage to survive a little longer, spread a little farther, or endure a little more hardship. Over millions of years, these tiny chances became monumental. They formed the branches of the tree of life, diverging, reconnecting, and diverging again. When we examine the deep past, we see not a clean, ordered march of progress, but a tangled mass of experiments, some brilliant, some disastrous, all driven by the unpredictable nature of existence. And so, from these early struggles and subtle shifts, the rhythm of evolution began to settle into the pulse that would guide life for billions of years. It was not guided by consciousness or purpose, but by survival, simple, persistent, unrelenting survival. In this sense, evolution mirrors the world around it, always in motion, always reshaping, always responding to new challenges. Life learned to change because the earth never stopped changing. And in the quiet churn of tides and the drifting shadows of early clouds, a principle emerged that would define the entire history of our planet: nothing alive can remain the same for long. In the early ages of our planet, long before any creature breathed or any root pierced the soil, Earth was a vast and restless laboratory. Oceans simmered with heat left over from formation, clouds churned with toxic gases, and lightning split the sky in relentless flashes. It was a world utterly alien to us, yet perfectly suited for the strange chemistry that would set life into motion. Here, in this chaotic blend of water, minerals, and energy, the first ingredients of biology were gathering, aimlessly, randomly, without purpose, but inevitably. Life did not begin with a spark of intention. It began with possibility. The oceans of this era were not the calm blue expanses we know today. They were dense with dissolved metals and rich in molecules drifting without meaning. Each tide stirred them, mixed them, scattered them across new surfaces and into new environments. As volcanic vents belched minerals into the water, and sunlight hammered the surface with ultraviolet radiation, chemical reactions flourished everywhere. Most were nothing special, small chains forming and breaking apart, structures rising for moments before dissolving again. But within this storm of interactions, something extraordinary was beginning. Molecules that could copy fragments of themselves, however imperfectly, began to emerge. These early self-replicators were not alive in any sense we would recognize. They had no bodies, no metabolism, no awareness. They were simply molecules following the rules of physics and chemistry, duplicating because the environment allowed them to. And yet, this simple act, replication, was enough to shift the entire destiny of the planet. A molecule that could make a crude version of itself gained a profound advantage: it persisted. Even if the copies were flawed, even if most were destroyed, some survived. In the vast immensity of time, survival, however small, makes all the difference. But replication alone was not enough. The early Earth was hostile, unpredictable, and violent. Waves crashed, temperatures fluctuated wildly, and meteors still fell from the sky. Any fragile molecule drifting alone had little hope of lasting long. What it needed was protection. And so, over countless cycles of trial and error, some molecules found themselves enclosed by simple membranes, tiny pockets formed from fatty substances that naturally sealed themselves into spheres. These primitive bubbles created safe zones where fragile strands could replicate in relative peace. The first protocells were born, not from design, but from physics pushing matter toward stability. Inside these early membranes, chemistry began to change. Reactions that once occurred freely in open water now became concentrated, repeated, and refined. Some protocells incorporated useful molecules that helped stabilize their structure or improve the efficiency of replication. Others floundered and vanished. Those that endured did so not because they were better, but because they were lucky enough to suit their environment a little more effectively. This is the essence of evolution's early moments, relentless filtering by circumstance. As the oceans continued to cycle, protocells drifted toward hydrothermal vents, shallow pools, and mineral-rich surfaces. Each location brought different challenges and opportunities. Some environments provided warmth and steady energy, allowing more frequent replication. Others offered new chemical building blocks, enabling the formation of more complex molecules. Over time, the protocells that survived developed increasingly stable ways of storing information. This is where molecular sequences, precursors to RNA, began to play a defining role. They offered a more reliable means of preserving patterns, the earliest form of hereditary continuity. Replication became more precise, though still far from perfect. Errors crept in constantly, but these errors were a blessing as often as a curse. A slight change in a sequence could make a protocell more resilient to heat, better at capturing energy, or more capable of maintaining its membrane. These chance modifications became the seeds of biological diversity, long before anything like a creature existed. Through countless generations, the protocells that adapted more effectively multiplied faster, gradually filling the oceans with descendants shaped by their unique histories. Yet even at this early stage, cooperation began to emerge. Some molecules inside protocells assisted others, creating small networks of mutually beneficial reactions. These primitive systems foreshadowed metabolism, the ability to convert environmental resources into usable energy. While simple, they marked a profound shift. Protocells were no longer just passive structures reacting to their surroundings. They were beginning to manipulate their environment internally, controlling the flow of energy in ways that gave them a better chance at survival. Still, nothing about this era was stable. The chemistry of early Earth was continually disrupted by shifting climates, tectonic activity, and cosmic impacts. Entire populations of protocells, if they can be called that, were wiped out many times over. But each extinction event cleared the stage for new variations, new combinations of molecules, and new possibilities. The ocean, in its turmoil, was performing countless experiments every second. As millions of years passed, some protocells discovered ways to harvest energy more efficiently, storing it in molecular bonds that could be used later. Others developed more advanced membranes, capable of maintaining internal balance even as external conditions changed. These improvements were not deliberate innovations, they were simply the outcomes of chemical variations that happened to work better. But slowly, step by step, life's foundations were forming. Eventually, a remarkable shift occurred. Some protocells began to use RNA not just for storing information but also for catalyzing reactions. This dual role, both blueprint and tool, made RNA the central molecule of early life. It allowed protocells to replicate faster, adapt more quickly, and evolve more complex internal chemistry. With RNA's rise, the boundary between chemistry and biology grew thinner. Life, in its earliest recognizable form, was emerging. And so, through a mixture of randomness, environmental pressure, and sheer persistence, the stage was set for everything that would follow. The great chemical lottery of early Earth had produced its most extraordinary prize, a self-sustaining system capable of change, capable of inheritance, and capable of responding to the world around it. From this fragile beginning, evolution would soon take its first monumental steps. In the young oceans of Earth, life existed on the thinnest possible edge, fragile, microscopic, and constantly threatened by forces far greater than itself. These earliest protocells and primitive replicators floated through waters that were still unstable, still unkind, still shifting between extremes of heat and cold. They had no senses, no awareness, not even the faintest idea of danger, yet their existence was a continuous struggle against destruction. Every moment was a negotiation with chemistry and chance. Ultraviolet radiation rained down from an atmosphere with no protective ozone. Sudden temperature spikes near volcanic vents could tear delicate molecular structures apart. Even simple turbulence in the water could crush a protocell against a rock or scatter its components forever. Life endured only by producing copies faster than the environment could eliminate them. The earliest forms resembled tiny molecular experiments, each one slightly different from the last. Some protocells possessed membranes that clung together a little more tightly, making them less likely to burst under pressure. Others protected their internal molecules better, allowing genetic sequences to survive long enough to replicate again. A few developed more efficient ways of gathering energy, absorbing sunlight or minerals from their surroundings. These differences were minuscule, but in a world of constant danger, even the smallest advantage could mean the difference between extinction and persistence. Evolution, in its earliest stage, was a slow but relentless force, a sculptor working with invisible tools, shaping life one molecule at a time. In these primitive oceans, competition was not driven by appetite or predation but by simple occupancy. If one protocell managed to survive and reproduce even slightly more efficiently than its neighbors, it could fill a local environment with its descendants. Meanwhile, less efficient forms faded quietly into oblivion. There were no dramatic battles, no movement, no hunting. Survival depended purely on the ability to resist the world's hostility for just a little longer than the next protocell. This was the first battlefield of life, a harsh but silent competition governed by chemistry. As time passed, molecules began to interact in ways that created unexpected advantages. Some sequences inside protocells folded into shapes that allowed them to catalyze reactions, speeding up essential chemical processes. This early form of enzymatic behavior meant that certain protocells could replicate their genetic material faster or assemble new building blocks more efficiently. With every replication, there were errors, tiny mutations that slightly altered the molecular instructions. Most offered no benefit, but occasionally one produced a trait that gave its protocell a greater chance of surviving the next environmental shift. These mutations were the raw material of evolution, driving life forward in countless small steps. But the world outside these protocells remained brutal. Massive tides from a young moon stirred the oceans violently. Meteor impacts threw molten rock into the air and boiled sections of the sea. Volcanic eruptions filled the water with toxic substances one year, then life-giving minerals the next. No protocell could predict or prepare for these shifts. They simply survived if their internal chemistry happened to be suited to the new conditions. Entire lineages likely rose and vanished without leaving a trace, erased by a single storm or fluctuation. Yet life continued, carried forward by the few that endured each challenge. Despite the constant destruction, something extraordinary was happening. Protocells were becoming more stable, more consistent, and better at storing information through generations. Their membranes grew more sophisticated, incorporating molecules that strengthened the protective barrier. Some membranes allowed certain ions in while keeping others out, maintaining a fragile balance between the inside and the outside. This subtle control was the beginning of homeostasis, the ability to regulate internal conditions, one of the core features of modern life. Meanwhile, the genetic sequences inside these protocells grew longer and more complex. The interaction between molecules became more coordinated, creating primitive networks of reactions that resembled early metabolic systems. These reactions enabled protocells to gather energy more reliably, repair damaged parts, and reproduce more accurately. Though still incredibly simple, these improvements transformed protocells from passive containers into active participants in their own survival. Life was beginning to push back against the environment instead of simply enduring it. As protocells drifted across different environments, hydrothermal vents, shallow pools, mineral-rich shores, each location offered new selective pressures. Near vents, heat-tolerant forms thrived. In shallow waters, those that protected themselves from sunlight's ultraviolet damage became dominant. On clay surfaces, molecules that adhered to minerals replicated more efficiently and survived long enough to form more complex structures. Evolution branched endlessly, testing new strategies without any intention, creating countless variants. The vast majority vanished, but the survivors became the ancestors of all living things. Eventually, some protocells developed systems that allowed their membranes to divide more reliably, ensuring that internal molecules were passed on in a consistent manner. This marked the transition from sporadic replication to something closer to true reproduction. Others developed internal structures that helped organize their genetic material, reducing the chaotic distribution of molecules during division. These refinements may seem small, but they created stability across generations. For the first time, life was not just surviving moment to moment, it was passing down traits with increasing accuracy. Yet even as these developments unfolded, danger remained constant. Drying tides could strand protocells on mineral surfaces, causing membranes to collapse. Powerful currents could smash them against rocks. Chemical imbalances could disrupt delicate internal reactions. Every improvement had to contend with a world that seemed determined to erase life as quickly as it formed. But life's resilience grew stronger with each cycle. More robust membranes, more efficient enzymes, and more reliable reproduction allowed certain protocells not only to endure but to flourish. Through billions of replications, experiments, and accidents, the first true cells emerged, fully enclosed packages of genetic material and metabolic reactions capable of sustaining themselves in a consistently organized way. These earliest cells were incredibly simple compared to anything alive today, yet they represented a monumental shift. They were no longer fleeting experiments of chemistry, they were biological entities, capable of lasting, adapting, and evolving in ways protocells never could. From these fragile beginnings, evolution would soon accelerate in astonishing directions. But for now, life remained tiny, vulnerable, and profoundly humble, proof that even the smallest spark can endure when challenged by a world always in motion. For millions of years, early life existed in a world where the atmosphere was almost entirely devoid of oxygen. The oceans were teeming with microscopic organisms that relied on simple chemical reactions to survive, drawing energy from minerals and sunlight in ways that demanded no breath. But something was changing beneath the surface, slowly, subtly, and with consequences far beyond anything life could anticipate. Among the most unassuming creatures drifting through the ancient seas were cyanobacteria, tiny architects of a revolution they did not know they were creating. Cyanobacteria carried a remarkable ability: they could capture sunlight and use it to split water molecules, releasing oxygen as waste. At first, this oxygen barely mattered. It reacted quickly with iron dissolved in the ocean, turning the water rusty and creating massive deposits of iron-rich rock that still exist today. But as these minerals became saturated, oxygen had nowhere else to go. It began to accumulate quietly, molecule by molecule, seeping into the water and eventually reaching the air. This slow build-up set the stage for one of the most dramatic turning points in Earth's history. To the microscopic life that dominated the oceans, oxygen was not a gift. It was poison. These early organisms had evolved in an oxygen-free world. Exposure to even small amounts could damage their cellular machinery, disrupt vital reactions, and destroy them from within. As cyanobacteria continued to pump oxygen into the environment, the balance shifted. What had been a stable, anaerobic planet suddenly became hostile to most of its inhabitants. Countless species perished as oxygen levels rose. Entire ecosystems collapsed in silence, extinguished not by catastrophe from space but by the slow, steady work of tiny cells transforming their world. Yet while oxygen spelled death for many organisms, it opened a universe of possibilities for others. Oxygen was incredibly reactive, capable of releasing vast amounts of energy when used in controlled chemical processes. For life forms that managed to adapt, this meant access to more efficient metabolism, enabling them to extract far more energy from their food. This newfound power allowed them to grow more complex, move more actively, and eventually evolve into entirely new forms. The creatures capable of harnessing oxygen would become the pioneers of complexity, laying the groundwork for the future diversity of life. But the transition was anything but smooth. As oxygen filled the atmosphere, it reacted with methane, a powerful greenhouse gas that had kept Earth warm under a faint young Sunday. With methane levels plummeting, the planet cooled drastically. Ice spread across the surface in what may have been the first global glaciation, turning Earth into a frozen world. For millions of years, the planet lay trapped in cold darkness, its oceans sealed beneath sheets of ice. Only in scattered refuges, near volcanic vents, geothermal pools, and cracks in the ice, did life manage to endure. These hidden sanctuaries acted as cradles for the future, preserving the survivors long enough for the climate to eventually stabilize. When the ice finally retreated, the planet emerged transformed. Oxygen now flowed through the atmosphere and oceans, ready to fuel the next great wave of biological innovation. Cells capable of using oxygen to generate energy multiplied rapidly, filling niches left empty by the earlier extinctions. Over time, some of these cells grew more structured and developed internal compartments to manage chemical reactions more efficiently. The rise of complex eukaryotic cells, which would later give rise to plants, animals, and fungi, became possible only because oxygen provided such rich energy resources. The shift also changed the chemistry of oceans and weather, altering the landscape in ways that made the planet more dynamic and diverse. Storm patterns evolved, climates became more stable, and coastlines shifted as oxygen reacted with minerals in the land and sea. The Earth was no longer a planet ruled solely by simple organisms. It had become a world primed for complexity, shaped by the unintended consequences of microscopic life. From a philosophical perspective, the oxygen revolution reveals something profound about evolution. Major transformations do not always come from dramatic creatures or conscious choices. Sometimes they are driven by the smallest organisms performing the simplest actions, unaware of how they are reshaping the world. The cyanobacteria did not set out to destroy their competitors or build a new atmosphere. They were merely surviving, carrying out the processes encoded in their chemistry. Yet their existence rewrote the rules of life on Earth. As oxygen continued to spread, it not only powered new forms of metabolism but also formed the protective ozone layer high in the atmosphere. This thin shield filtered harmful ultraviolet radiation, making it possible for life to explore new environments, including the surface of the ocean and eventually the land itself. With protection above and energy within, life stood on the edge of unprecedented expansion. The oxygen revolution was both a mass extinction and a new beginning. It was destruction intertwined with creation, a testament to evolution's dual nature. Life reshaped the world reshaped life, and from this endless interaction, the story of complex organisms began to unfold, a story that would eventually lead to the vast web of life we know today. As oxygen spread through the oceans and energy became more abundant, life faced a new challenge: how to use that energy more efficiently. Simple single-celled organisms had survived for billions of years relying on basic chemical reactions, but the opportunity to exploit oxygen opened doors that would forever change the trajectory of evolution. In this environment, the first alliances between cells began to emerge, silent, accidental, and yet profoundly consequential. Cells that had once been independent now found that survival could be enhanced through cooperation. Some small, energy-producing cells became engulfed by larger cells in what would seem, at first, a perilous act. Most of these attempts ended in destruction. The engulfed cell was digested, its contents consumed. But in rare cases, a remarkable balance was achieved. The smaller cell survived within its host, providing extra energy in exchange for protection. This was the beginning of endosymbiosis, a process that would eventually give rise to mitochondria, the powerhouses of virtually every complex cell today. These microscopic mergers were not planned or guided. They were accidental partnerships forged in the crucible of survival, yet they allowed life to reach new heights of complexity. These early symbiotic unions transformed the capabilities of cells. Suddenly, a single cell could generate far more energy than before, supporting larger structures, more intricate internal organization, and increasingly sophisticated behaviors. With greater energy resources, cells could maintain more complicated genetic material, develop specialized compartments to manage reactions, and experiment with new biochemical pathways. This increased organizational capacity laid the foundation for the first eukaryotic cells, which would eventually give rise to all plants, animals, fungi, and countless other life forms. Life was no longer limited to small, simple forms. It had discovered a pathway to complexity. Cooperation at the cellular level also introduced a new dynamic into evolution: trade-offs. Hosting a symbiont required the larger cell to invest resources in maintaining the smaller partner. Energy had to be shared, conditions had to be regulated, and mistakes could prove fatal. Yet the advantages often outweighed the costs. Cells that embraced this cooperation could exploit ecological niches inaccessible to solitary organisms. In essence, life was learning a critical lesson: survival was not only about competing with neighbors but also about forming alliances, even with entirely different species. This principle would echo through evolutionary history in countless ways, from social insects to human societies. Over time, these cooperative cells gave rise to entirely new forms of life capable of behaviors unimaginable to their single-celled ancestors. Multicellularity emerged as cells began to specialize, each taking on distinct roles within a larger organism. Some cells focused on reproduction, others on movement, and still others on processing energy. This division of labor, made possible by the energy advantages conferred by symbiosis, allowed organisms to grow larger, survive longer, and adapt to a wider range of environments. What had begun as a fragile accident, one cell consuming another, had become a driving force for innovation in life itself. The rise of complex cells also reshaped the ecological landscape. Organisms could now occupy new environments, exploit new resources, and interact in increasingly sophisticated ways. The interplay between predator and prey, host and symbiont, producer and consumer all grew more intricate. Each interaction created pressures that further refined cellular organization, favoring those capable of adjusting to their surroundings with precision and resilience. Evolution was no longer a simple process of mutation and survival, it was becoming a dynamic web of relationships, a network in which cooperation and competition were intertwined. Philosophically, the emergence of cooperative cells demonstrates the unpredictability of evolution. The formation of mitochondria, and later chloroplasts in photosynthetic cells, was not inevitable. It was a product of chance encounters, environmental pressures, and the rare survival of mutually beneficial relationships. Yet from this improbable beginning arose the vast diversity of complex life that would dominate the planet for billions of years. Life shows time and again that adaptation does not require foresight, it requires persistence, experimentation, and a willingness to embrace the accidental. These first complex cells, quietly multiplying in ancient seas, set the stage for an explosion of innovation. With mitochondria providing abundant energy and internal compartments allowing sophisticated biochemical regulation, cells could attempt feats that had been impossible for billions of years. They could grow larger, store more genetic information, respond to environmental signals more accurately, and eventually specialize into the building blocks of multicellular organisms. Every feature that would later appear in plants, animals, fungi, and more had its roots in these microscopic alliances. Ultimately, this period in life's history illustrates a central truth: evolution is as much about cooperation as it is about competition. While natural selection often rewards the strongest or fastest, it also favors those willing, or able, to work together in ways that enhance survival. By merging, by sharing energy, and by creating internal networks, cells learn to transcend the limitations of individuality. The accidental unions of billions of years ago would ripple forward, shaping ecosystems, enabling complexity, and setting the stage for every innovation that followed. In the grand narrative of life, cooperation had become as essential as survival itself, proving that even in the harshest environments, unity can become a powerful tool in the endless battle to endure. As life grew more complex, a new force emerged that would reshape ecosystems and drive innovation in ways unimaginable: predation. For billions of years, organisms had been relatively simple, feeding on chemical energy, sunlight, or dissolved nutrients. But as some cells and early multicellular organisms developed motility, jaws, or simple digestive systems, the balance of existence shifted. Life was no longer merely a matter of surviving environmental pressures, it now had to evade, confront, or become a predator itself. The emergence of predation transformed the evolutionary landscape, introducing urgency, fear, and competition on a scale that had never existed before. The first predators were tiny, often microscopic, yet their impact was immense. Single-celled organisms capable of engulfing others began to hunt smaller cells, selecting for traits that increased speed, stealth, and defense. Organisms that could swim faster, detect movement, or develop protective coatings were more likely to survive. Predation drove a rapid arms race, prey adapted to avoid capture, while predators evolved new strategies to catch them. This invisible struggle in the primordial oceans laid the foundation for one of evolution's most powerful engines: escalation. Each adaptation, whether in predator or prey, demanded a response from the other, sparking innovation in form, function, and behavior. As multicellular life appeared, the stakes grew higher. Tiny worms, sponges, and early jelly-like creatures experimented with movement, sensory perception, and basic coordination. Those that could sense changes in light, detect vibrations, or secrete chemicals to deter attackers gained a critical advantage. Predation was no longer a simple act of consumption, it became a selective pressure that shaped bodies, behaviors, and even internal systems. Armor-like shells, spines, and toxins emerged, not as conscious designs, but as consequences of survival. Evolution was beginning to craft increasingly sophisticated strategies in response to the relentless presence of danger. Predation also altered ecological relationships. Simple nutrient cycles expanded into complex food webs. No organism existed in isolation, the fate of one depended on the actions of many. Prey species influenced the abundance and success of predators, while predators regulated populations and prevented any single species from dominating. This interdependence fueled diversity, encouraging experimentation with new forms, behaviors, and survival strategies. The ocean became a stage for a high-stakes drama in which every movement carried risk, and every advantage could be the difference between life and extinction. The pressure of predation accelerated innovation in mobility. Organisms that could move with purpose gained the ability to escape threats, pursue food, or colonize new habitats. Muscles, cilia, flagella, and other locomotor structures evolved in response to this constant demand. Eyes, one of evolution's most iconic adaptations, emerged to detect predators and prey alike, transforming the way organisms interacted with their environment. Sensory perception became a survival tool, guiding decisions, movements, and strategies in real time. The ocean, once a passive environment, became a dynamic arena shaped by sight, speed, and cunning. Yet the evolution of predation was not simply about offense, defense became equally vital. Organisms developed chemical deterrents, toxins, and poisons. Shells thickened, spines grew longer, and flexible bodies became capable of sudden evasive maneuvers. The arms race drove innovation in astonishing directions, producing traits that would seem miraculous if viewed without the context of natural selection. Predation forced life to experiment, to push boundaries, and to solve problems that had never existed before. Every encounter, no matter how small, contributed to the shaping of form and function across generations. Beyond its immediate effects on morphology and behavior, predation had profound implications for evolution on a philosophical level. It introduced mortality as a direct, tangible force in ways that no environmental shift alone had achieved. Survival was no longer abstract or passive, it required awareness, adaptation, and sometimes ingenuity. Predators and prey became locked in a cycle of influence, each shaping the other across countless generations. Evolution was not just a response to heat, pressure, or chemistry anymore, it had become a contest of strategy, speed, and perception. As these interactions continued, life's complexity grew exponentially. Simple organisms evolved into increasingly intricate forms, experimenting with movement, sensory organs, and internal systems capable of responding to a world full of threats. Predation pushed life toward specialization, diversity, and creativity. From the smallest protozoans to early multicellular animals, the presence of predators transformed the very rules of survival. Life was no longer simply enduring, it was actively engaged in a struggle, continuously testing the limits of what was possible. By the time the oceans teemed with early animals, predation had become a central driving force of evolution. The first fear, the first chase, and the first consumption set in motion a cascade of adaptations that would ripple through time. Life learned to sense, to hide, to strike, and to endure, producing innovations that laid the groundwork for the vast diversity of organisms that would follow. In this ancient theater, survival was not just a matter of existing, it was a high-stakes dance of danger and ingenuity, one that would define the trajectory of life for billions of years to come. As predation intensified in the primordial oceans, another evolutionary force quietly began to shape life in profound ways: the ability to sense and respond to the environment. Survival was no longer determined solely by chemical stability, reproduction, or energy efficiency. Now, organisms faced a world filled with invisible dangers, shifting currents, and unpredictable opportunities. Those that could detect subtle changes in light, pressure, or chemical gradients gained an edge over those that remained passive. Sensory perception became a survival tool, driving innovation at a pace unseen in life's earlier history. The simplest forms of sensory awareness likely began as chemical detection. Tiny organisms could sense the presence of nutrients, toxins, or waste products in their immediate environment, moving toward food and away from danger. These chemical cues, often imperceptible to an external observer, guided behavior in ways that dramatically increased the odds of survival. A cell that could detect an approaching predator even a fraction of a second faster than its neighbor could avoid being consumed, giving it a chance to reproduce and pass on its advantageous traits. Over time, these minute differences accumulated, driving evolutionary change in both prey and predator. Mechanical sensing, feeling pressure, vibration, or movement, soon followed. Organisms that could detect the flow of water or the approach of a predator gained an immediate benefit. Simple hair-like structures, cilia, and other mechanoreceptors began to evolve, allowing life to react in real time to environmental shifts. This development marked a transition from passive survival to active engagement with the world. Life was learning not only to endure, but to anticipate, respond, and adapt with purpose, even without consciousness. Light detection represented a monumental leap in evolutionary capability. The first primitive eyes were nothing like the complex organs we recognize today; they were merely patches of light-sensitive cells capable of distinguishing light from shadow. Yet even this rudimentary ability provided a decisive advantage. Organisms could orient themselves toward food, avoid harmful ultraviolet exposure, or detect movement in the water. Once the blueprint for visual perception existed, evolution rapidly refined it. Compound eyes, lenses, and photoreceptor arrays emerged, each increasing the sophistication of environmental awareness. Suddenly, the ocean was no longer a blind expanse; organisms could see, interpret, and respond to it in ways that reshaped the dynamics of survival. Chemical, mechanical, and visual senses combined to create feedback loops that fueled adaptation. Predator and prey became locked in a dynamic conversation mediated by perception. Prey species evolved camouflage, erratic movements, or chemical deterrents to escape detection. Predators evolved sharper eyes, faster responses, and more precise hunting strategies. Each innovation in sensing was met with counter-innovation, creating an endless cycle of adaptation and counter-adaptation. This interplay accelerated evolution far beyond the pace of random mutation alone. The emergence of sensory perception also influenced behavior on a larger scale. Cells and early multicellular organisms began to coordinate movements, respond to environmental gradients, and interact with one another in more complex ways. Groups of cells could migrate toward favorable conditions, avoid toxins, or collectively respond to threats. Simple signaling molecules allowed for communication between individuals, laying the groundwork for social behaviors that would become essential in later animal life. Sensing was no longer an isolated adaptation; it was a foundation for cooperation, coordination, and collective survival. From a philosophical perspective, the development of sensory perception illustrates the remarkable interplay between chance, necessity, and opportunity in evolution. Life did not plan to see, feel, or respond to its environment; these abilities arose as solutions to immediate survival challenges. Yet once in place, they unlocked possibilities that life could not have foreseen. Eyes, ears, nerves, and signaling systems all began as incremental advantages, yet they eventually enabled behaviors as sophisticated as hunting, mating, learning, and social interaction. The evolution of perception demonstrates how complexity emerges from simple pressures, gradually transforming the very nature of existence. By the time multicellular animals had established themselves in the oceans, sensory capabilities had become deeply embedded in survival strategies. Movement was guided by perception, feeding by detection, and defense by anticipation. Life had transformed from reactive chemistry into dynamic engagement, capable of interacting with the environment in increasingly nuanced ways. Predators and prey were no longer simple participants in a mechanical struggle, they were agents, responding to information, calculating probabilities, and making split-second decisions shaped by evolution. Ultimately, the evolution of sensory systems set the stage for the next great leaps in life's history. Organisms that could sense, interpret, and respond to their surroundings had the foundation for intelligence, learning, and complex behaviors. The ocean became a rich tapestry of interactions, a constantly shifting theater in which perception determined survival, and awareness became as critical as strength or speed. Life was entering a phase in which the ability to know the world, even in the simplest form, would become one of its most powerful tools. From chemical gradients to compound eyes, the journey of sensing the world had begun, reshaping life forever and setting the course for the emergence of true complexity. With the evolution of sensory perception, life gained the tools to interact with the environment in increasingly sophisticated ways, and soon, another profound shift began to take shape, the emergence of movement as a defining strategy for survival. For billions of years, most organisms had been largely passive, drifting with currents or relying on chemical gradients to bring resources to them. Now, organisms capable of purposeful movement could actively pursue food, evade predators, and explore new habitats. This ability to navigate the world marked a turning point, allowing life to break free from the constraints of randomness and inertia. Movement began in the simplest forms, tiny flagella or cilia propelling single cells through the water. At first, the advantages were subtle but decisive. Cells that could move slightly faster or in a more directed manner reached nutrient-rich areas before others, escaped harmful conditions, and avoided predators more effectively. Over countless generations, even small improvements in movement conferred a measurable survival benefit, and natural selection favored those capable of more precise and sustained motion. This simple drive to move transformed life from static entities into dynamic participants in their own evolution. As multicellular organisms emerged, movement evolved in complexity and scale. Groups of cells coordinated contractions to create crawling, undulating, or swimming forms. Soft-bodied animals, such as early worms and jellyfish-like creatures, experimented with muscular and hydrostatic systems that allowed coordinated propulsion. Each improvement in locomotion enabled exploration of new environments, access to untapped food sources, and avoidance of previously unavoidable threats. Mobility became not just a survival mechanism, but a tool for innovation, opening ecological niches that had been inaccessible for eons. Predation and movement were closely intertwined. For prey, the ability to detect a predator and react with speed or evasive maneuvers became a defining factor in survival. For predators, refined movement allowed pursuit, ambush, and strategic positioning. The ocean became a theater of motion and reaction, with evolutionary pressures amplifying small advantages into significant innovations. Muscular coordination, flexible body plans, and the development of appendages such as primitive fins or tentacles emerged as solutions to these pressures. Life was now sculpted by both speed and strategy, and every movement carried evolutionary consequences. The evolution of movement also drove diversification. Organisms began to exploit the vertical dimension of the ocean, moving upward toward light or downward toward nutrient-rich depths. This shift created vertical stratification, where different species specialized in particular layers, each responding to unique environmental pressures. Currents, temperature gradients, and oxygen availability all influenced patterns of movement, encouraging adaptations in morphology and physiology. Life was no longer a simple horizontal spread, it began to occupy space in 3 dimensions, multiplying opportunities for specialization and interaction. Movement also laid the foundation for the first behavioral strategies. Organisms began responding not only reflexively, but in ways that suggested primitive forms of decision-making. Swimming toward food, away from predators, or toward mates required sensing, processing, and reacting, a feedback loop that linked perception with action. Even at this microscopic or simple multicellular scale, life was beginning to exhibit patterns that foreshadowed behavior, intelligence, and the earliest forms of learning. Each encounter, each motion, carried lessons that would echo through evolutionary time. From a philosophical standpoint, the emergence of movement underscores evolution's power to transform constraints into opportunities. For billions of years, life had been bound by chemistry, currents, and chance. The ability to move changed the terms of survival entirely. No longer passive recipients of environmental pressures, organisms became active participants, capable of shaping their own experience and influencing their evolutionary trajectory. Movement represented autonomy, agency, and the first glimmer of control over destiny in the natural world. Energy, already abundant thanks to oxygen, allowed organisms to sustain more complex and persistent motion. Cells and early animals could afford to invest resources in musculature, coordination, and internal support systems because the rewards, access to resources, avoidance of danger, and reproductive success, outweighed the costs. Locomotion and energy utilization became deeply intertwined, setting a precedent for future innovations in metabolism, organ systems, and behavioral complexity. Movement and energy exploitation co-evolved, reinforcing each other in a dynamic feedback loop that would drive the rise of more advanced life. By the time early animals had diversified, movement had become a defining feature of life. Swimming, crawling, undulating, and gliding were no longer mere responses, they were strategies. Mobility shaped anatomy, dictated ecological interactions, and catalyzed behavioral sophistication. The ocean, once a passive stage, became a complex arena where survival depended not only on chemistry, perception, and replication, but on the ability to navigate, pursue, evade, and explore. Life had discovered motion, and with it, a new dimension of possibility that would guide evolution for hundreds of millions of years, setting the stage for the rise of predators, prey, and the first truly complex ecosystems. With movement firmly established as a tool for survival, life entered a new era where size began to matter. For billions of years, organisms had been constrained by microscopic dimensions, limited by diffusion, nutrient availability, and energy requirements. But as multicellularity solidified, the potential for larger forms became a reality. Organisms could grow bigger, not merely as a matter of scale, but as a strategy for survival, reproduction, and ecological dominance. Size, it turned out, was not just physical, it was evolutionary currency, influencing who lived, who perished, and who could shape the environment around them. Larger bodies conferred several advantages. Bigger organisms could store more energy, resist environmental fluctuations more effectively, and tolerate predators that smaller creatures could not. They could move with greater efficiency, cover more territory, and access resources unavailable to their diminutive neighbors. But size also brought challenges. Oxygen and nutrients needed to reach every cell efficiently, requiring internal transport systems. Waste products had to be removed quickly to avoid toxic buildup. These demands drove innovations in physiology, rudimentary circulatory systems, internal channels, and more structured tissue arrangements emerged, each enabling life to scale in complexity and dimension. Growth also intensified ecological interactions. A larger organism could influence entire communities, shaping the distribution and abundance of other species. Predators could dominate previously untouchable prey, while herbivores could consume plant matter on a scale that smaller grazers could not. The rules of survival shifted, sheer presence could confer both protection and influence. Organisms no longer needed to be cunning alone, they could simply be formidable, altering the dynamics of their surroundings through size, strength, and energy reserves. With increased scale came diversification in form and function. Bodies began to specialize, with certain regions dedicated to locomotion, others to feeding, and still others to reproduction. Internal complexity increased to coordinate these systems, fostering innovations in nerves, muscles, and sensory organs. The emergence of a central nervous system, even in its simplest form, allowed larger organisms to integrate information, make rapid decisions, and respond adaptively to a dynamic environment. Evolution was no longer just shaping chemical reactions or cell membranes, it was sculpting anatomy, behavior, and coordination on a grand scale. Size also introduced new vulnerabilities, which paradoxically accelerated evolution. Large organisms required more food, more energy, and more protection. They became attractive targets for predators capable of overcoming their defenses. Injuries could be fatal without sufficient repair mechanisms, and reproduction could become a riskier endeavor. These pressures created a continuous feedback loop: growth demanded innovation, and innovation enabled further growth. Every increase in size was matched by evolutionary solutions: stronger skeletons, improved mobility, more sophisticated sensory systems, that allowed life to thrive in new ways. The relationship between size and survival extended into reproduction as well. Larger organisms could produce more offspring, carry more energy reserves for developing young, and invest in protective structures to ensure the continuation of their lineage. In some cases, they could dominate territories, exclude competitors, and monopolize resources. Evolution was rewarding scale not only for immediate survival but for the ability to perpetuate advantageous traits across generations. In this sense, size became both a defense mechanism and a reproductive strategy, intertwined with every aspect of life's persistence. Philosophically, the rise of larger organisms reflects a recurring theme in evolution: adaptation is never linear or predictable. Life did not grow bigger with intention. Size emerged as a consequence of opportunity, necessity, and the advantages conferred by energy and cooperation. What began as simple multicellularity expanded into forms capable of transforming entire ecosystems. Oceans that were once a realm of microscopic drift were now filled with creatures large enough to stir currents, alter habitats, and dominate niches. Life was asserting itself, demonstrating that even incremental advantages, compounded over millions of years, could yield extraordinary results. Ultimately, the rise of size reshaped evolutionary pressures and ecological dynamics in ways that would resonate for hundreds of millions of years. Organisms were no longer solely at the mercy of chemistry or predators; their own scale, organization, and energy capacity became central to survival. The interplay of size, complexity, and ecological influence laid the groundwork for the first true ecosystems: intricate networks of predators, prey, and competitors, each responding to and shaping the other. Life was no longer microscopic and passive; it had begun to dominate, experiment, and define the world around it, using size as both a shield and a sword in the relentless pursuit of survival. As size became a critical factor in survival, another transformative force began to emerge: the evolution of hard parts. For the first billions of years of life, organisms were soft-bodied, relying on flexibility, chemical defenses, or camouflage to survive. These strategies were effective, but they imposed limits on growth, movement, and protection. The development of mineralized skeletons, shells, and exoskeletons represented a monumental shift. Hard structures not only provided defense against predators but also offered support for larger, more complex bodies, opening new ecological possibilities that soft tissues alone could not sustain. The earliest hard structures were simple. Tiny shells of calcium carbonate or silica appeared in marine organisms, providing protection from predators and environmental hazards. These modest defenses offered significant survival advantages. Organisms with even thin, rigid coverings were less likely to be eaten, more capable of withstanding turbulent waters, and able to exploit niches that exposed soft-bodied organisms could not. Over time, the presence of hard parts became a key differentiator, influencing reproductive success and shaping evolutionary trajectories across countless lineages. Once the benefits of hard structures were established, natural selection drove refinement. Shells thickened, spines protruded, and exoskeletons became articulated to allow both protection and mobility. These innovations allowed organisms to grow larger, move with strength and precision, and survive encounters that would have been fatal to softer-bodied counterparts. Hard parts transformed life from fragile and vulnerable into formidable and resilient. They were not merely defensive, they became tools, frameworks, and engines of evolutionary experimentation. The development of skeletons also facilitated new modes of movement and behavior. Internal frameworks provided anchor points for muscles, enabling more coordinated and powerful locomotion. Organisms could push, pull, or swim with greater efficiency, and appendages such as limbs, claws, and fins became more effective. Hard structures allowed for rapid responses to predators and prey, increased exploration of diverse habitats, and a wider range of ecological interactions. Movement was no longer just muscular, it was supported, reinforced, and amplified by rigid frameworks that expanded the possibilities of life. Hard parts also drove evolutionary arms races in remarkable ways. Predators evolved stronger jaws, sharper teeth, and piercing appendages capable of overcoming the defenses of hard-bodied prey. In turn, prey species developed thicker shells, intricate spines, and mechanisms for retreat or evasion. Each innovation prompted a countermeasure, producing a cycle of adaptation that accelerated complexity. Evolution became not just a passive response to the environment, but a dynamic contest of offense and defense, where survival depended on the interplay of strength, strategy, and material innovation. The ecological impact of hard parts extended far beyond individual survival. Fossilized shells, exoskeletons, and skeletal remains began to accumulate on the ocean floor, altering sediment composition and influencing chemical cycles. These remnants created habitats for other organisms, provided shelter, and even contributed to reef formation. In this way, the evolution of hard structures reshaped ecosystems, transforming oceans into intricate, multi-layered environments filled with niches, refuges, and resources that soft-bodied organisms could not exploit. Life was no longer defined solely by movement and perception, it was also defined by the physical structures it could create and inhabit. From a philosophical perspective, the emergence of hard parts illustrates how evolution transforms constraints into opportunities. Initially, life was soft, limited by vulnerability and structural fragility. But by incorporating minerals into their bodies, organisms overcame these limitations and unlocked entirely new avenues for growth, interaction, and innovation. Hard parts were both armor and scaffold, protection and opportunity, illustrating that the evolutionary process constantly finds ways to exploit the materials and conditions available, producing outcomes that are at once practical and transformative. The fossil record vividly demonstrates the impact of this transformation. Once hard parts appeared, life became more visible, leaving traces that would allow future generations, millions of years later, to reconstruct the history of life. These structures not only altered survival dynamics at the time but also ensured that organisms could leave enduring evidence of their existence. In essence, hard parts made life more resilient in the present and more permanent in the historical record, connecting survival with legacy in a profound way. Ultimately, the evolution of hard parts marked a turning point in life's journey. It allowed organisms to grow larger, move more effectively, resist predators, and shape their environments. It introduced new dynamics into ecosystems, accelerated evolutionary arms races, and laid the groundwork for complex behaviors and interactions. Life had discovered a new dimension, the ability to manipulate and incorporate the very materials of the earth into its own structure. With this innovation, organisms were no longer merely subjects of natural forces, they had begun to wield them, turning survival into an intricate dance of biology, strategy, and design that would define the trajectory of life for hundreds of millions of years to come. With the evolution of hard parts and complex movement, life on Earth was entering an era of unprecedented diversification. Ecosystems, once simple and dominated by soft-bodied organisms, now thrummed with activity, complexity, and interaction. The stage was set for one of the most transformative events in evolutionary history, the Cambrian explosion. Over a relatively short span of time, in geological terms, nearly all major animal body plans appeared. The oceans became a theater of innovation, adaptation, and competition, where survival was no longer simply a matter of being fast or small, it was about specialization, strategy, and exploiting every niche available. During this period, sensory perception, movement, and defensive adaptations converged to create a new evolutionary dynamic. Predators had grown faster, sharper, and more coordinated, capable of striking with precision at unsuspecting prey. Prey, in turn, evolved elaborate shells, spines, and behaviors designed to evade these attacks. Eyes became increasingly sophisticated, enabling creatures to see with clarity and react with immediacy. Each adaptation was magnified by the pressures of survival, creating a cascade of innovation that transformed marine ecosystems in ways that would resonate for millions of years. This era was characterized not only by biological novelty but also by ecological complexity. Species diversified to occupy specific roles within food webs. Some became grazers, others filter feeders, while predators carved out territories at the top of the food chain. Symbiotic relationships flourished, as organisms co-evolved to exploit one another, either through mutual benefit or parasitic strategies. The rise of specialized feeding, reproduction, and locomotion strategies amplified the evolutionary arms race, ensuring that no organism remained static for long. In this environment, innovation was a prerequisite for survival. The appearance of skeletons, both internal and external, facilitated the emergence of larger and more intricate organisms. Hard parts allowed the development of articulated limbs, complex jaws, and other appendages that enabled precise movement and manipulation. Predators could grasp, pierce, and crush, while prey could defend, burrow, or escape with agility. Size, which had already become advantageous, was now reinforced by structural support, allowing for more elaborate morphologies and behaviors. Life was no longer constrained by simplicity, complexity had become both possible and advantageous. One of the most profound outcomes of this explosion of life was the establishment of modern ecological principles. Niche differentiation, predator-prey interactions, and spatial partitioning all began to define how species coexisted. Organisms were no longer merely passive participants in a chemical or energy-driven world, they were actors, shaping their environment through behavior, movement, and adaptation. Every encounter, every interaction, left an imprint on the evolutionary trajectory of both predator and prey, reinforcing the principle that life evolves not in isolation but in response to others within its ecosystem. The Cambrian period also underscored the role of experimentation in evolution. Many early body plans that emerged during this time would leave no lasting descendants, representing evolutionary dead ends. Yet these experiments were crucial. They tested the boundaries of form and function, explored new methods of locomotion, feeding, and defense, and paved the way for lineages that would endure for millions of years. Evolution, in this sense, is a process of trial and error on a grand scale, where the successes shape the future and the failures inform it. From a philosophical perspective, the Cambrian explosion illustrates evolution's capacity for creativity under pressure. Life did not consciously plan or predict its outcomes, it responded to environmental challenges, predation, and opportunities for survival. Yet the results were astonishingly diverse, revealing that natural selection, given time and the right conditions, can produce complexity and novelty on an almost unimaginable scale. This period is a testament to the idea that evolution is both opportunistic and inexorably inventive, generating forms and behaviors far beyond the expectations of any individual organism. By the end of the Cambrian, life had transformed from a relatively uniform microbial world into a richly structured biosphere filled with predators, prey, and a wide variety of ecological strategies. The oceans were no longer mere habitats, they were complex ecosystems, shaped by competition, cooperation, and the relentless drive to survive. This period set the stage for subsequent evolutionary innovations, including the colonization of land, the rise of vertebrates, and eventually the emergence of humans. Ultimately, the Cambrian explosion was not simply a moment in history, it was a demonstration of evolution's power to generate diversity, complexity, and interdependence. Sensory perception, movement, size, hard parts, and ecological interactions converged to create a vibrant tapestry of life. The lessons of this period endure: adaptation is continuous, survival is multifaceted, and life's capacity for innovation is boundless. In these ancient oceans, the foundation was laid for the intricate, interwoven, and astonishingly complex web of life that defines our planet today. As the Cambrian explosion gave rise to an astonishing array of marine life, another transformative force quietly began to reshape evolutionary trajectories: the colonization of new environments. Life had thrived in the oceans for billions of years, yet the boundary between water and land represented both an immense challenge and an unparalleled opportunity. Water provided support, nutrient transport, and a relatively stable environment, but it also constrained movement, behavior, and ecological interactions. The air above the waves, with its light, space, and unoccupied niches, beckoned as the next frontier, promising freedom and risk in equal measure. The transition from aquatic to terrestrial life required radical adaptations. Gravity, irrelevant in the buoyant ocean, suddenly imposed constraints on structural integrity. Support systems had to become more robust to prevent collapse, and organisms needed new ways to move across solid substrates. Respiratory systems designed for water had to be modified or reinvented to extract oxygen from air, and desiccation, drying out, posed a constant threat. Only those organisms capable of addressing these fundamental challenges could exploit the land, and the evolutionary pressure to overcome them was immense. Early pioneers in this conquest were plants and fungi. By developing rigid support structures, vascular systems, and protective coatings, they colonized the land with surprising speed. Root systems allowed them to anchor to the soil, absorb nutrients, and create new habitats for other organisms. Their presence transformed the terrestrial landscape, stabilizing soil, moderating water cycles, and producing oxygen, which would become essential for the next wave of terrestrial colonizers. In doing so, they laid the ecological foundation for animal life to follow, demonstrating that even stationary organisms could exert profound influence on their environment. Animals followed, initially in the form of arthropods and other small invertebrates. Their exoskeletons, segmented bodies, and jointed appendages proved advantageous for terrestrial movement, protection, and resource exploitation. These early land dwellers navigated the challenges of gravity and desiccation with remarkable ingenuity. Moist microhabitats, burrowing behaviors, and nocturnal activity patterns allowed them to avoid the harshest environmental stressors while expanding their ecological reach. Each successful adaptation reinforced the evolutionary potential of terrestrial life, opening doors that had previously remained closed. The colonization of land also intensified selective pressures, accelerating the evolution of sensory perception, mobility, and reproductive strategies. Vision and chemoreception became critical for navigating a more variable environment, detecting food, avoiding predators, and finding mates. Limbs evolved to support coordinated movement on solid surfaces, and behaviors emerged to optimize energy use and reproductive success. Life was no longer constrained to two dimensions. The terrestrial world demanded innovation in structure, function, and behavior, and those capable of meeting the challenge thrived. This transition demonstrates the interplay between opportunity and risk in evolution. Land offered abundant resources, freedom from many aquatic predators, and niches largely unoccupied, but it was unforgiving. Organisms faced temperature fluctuations, UV radiation, and limited moisture, each threatening survival. Only the most adaptable survived, illustrating evolution's constant tension between exploitation of opportunity and management of risk. Those that succeeded in conquering terrestrial habitats set the stage for future evolutionary leaps, including the rise of vertebrates and eventually large terrestrial ecosystems. From a philosophical perspective, the move onto land underscores life's resilience and creativity. Evolution does not plan, but it responds to challenges and opportunities with remarkable ingenuity. Organisms that could negotiate entirely new physical constraints, exploit untapped resources, and coordinate complex behaviors demonstrated the transformative power of natural selection. This milestone illustrates that evolution is a process not only of survival but of expansion, pushing boundaries and reshaping what is possible for life on Earth. The colonization of land also reshaped ecological dynamics. The interplay between plants, fungi, and animals created intricate networks of interaction. Herbivory, predation, and symbiosis took on new forms, with terrestrial ecosystems developing layered complexity similar to, but distinct from, aquatic systems. Life was no longer constrained by the fluid uniformity of the oceans, it now inhabited a three-dimensional, highly variable, and competitive landscape. These early experiments in terrestrial life would influence evolutionary trajectories for hundreds of millions of years, culminating in diverse forests, deserts, and grasslands. Ultimately, the conquest of land represents one of the most significant evolutionary leaps since the origin of life itself. It demanded structural, physiological, and behavioral innovation, challenged organisms to overcome constraints previously unseen, and reshaped the planet's biosphere. Life proved that it was not bound to a single environment, that adaptability and persistence could overcome seemingly insurmountable barriers. The colonization of land stands as a testament to life's relentless drive to explore, innovate, and survive, demonstrating that evolution is a story of expansion, risk, and the endless pursuit of opportunity in a constantly changing world. As life established itself on land, a new set of challenges and opportunities emerged, driving evolution in directions never before experienced in the oceans. Terrestrial habitats were more heterogeneous than marine environments, with microclimates, variable terrain, and rapidly changing conditions. Organisms were forced to cope with extremes of temperature, exposure to sunlight, limited water availability, and new patterns of predation and competition. Survival required not just structural adaptations but complex behaviors, physiological innovations, and reproductive strategies capable of meeting these new demands. The land became a crucible, testing life in ways that accelerated evolutionary experimentation. One of the most profound pressures was the need for water conservation. Whereas aquatic organisms could rely on the surrounding medium to maintain hydration, terrestrial life faced the constant risk of desiccation. Adaptations such as waxy coatings, cuticles, and enclosed respiratory systems evolved to mitigate water loss. Behavioral adaptations complemented these physical innovations. Many species became nocturnal, seeking shelter during the heat of the day, while others burrowed into soil or leaf litter to maintain moisture. The struggle for hydration influenced nearly every aspect of morphology and behavior, shaping the evolution of life in fundamental ways. Reproduction on land presented another challenge that demanded creativity. In water, gametes could disperse freely, and fertilization was relatively straightforward. On land, desiccation threatened eggs and sperm, forcing the evolution of protective structures. The development of eggs with shells, protective coatings, or internal fertilization allowed organisms to reproduce successfully in the terrestrial environment. These innovations had profound consequences, not only for survival but for the diversification of species. Life had developed a mechanism to extend its generational legacy beyond the confines of aquatic habitats, ensuring its persistence in a harsh and variable landscape. Movement and locomotion were similarly transformed. Gravity, negligible in the supportive ocean, became a dominant force on land. Limbs, muscular coordination, and skeletal support systems evolved to meet the challenges of walking, climbing, burrowing, and running. Organisms had to navigate complex terrain while avoiding predators, seeking food, and locating mates. The evolution of limbs and structural support allowed unprecedented mobility, opening new niches and ecological opportunities. The interplay between anatomy, behavior, and environment became more intricate, accelerating the pace of adaptation. Predation also intensified in terrestrial environments, creating evolutionary pressure that mirrored, yet amplified, that of the oceans. New predators developed strategies to capture prey across complex landscapes, while prey evolved camouflage, speed, and defensive mechanisms suited to forests, deserts, and plains. Life was now engaged in a multidimensional arms race, where success required the integration of sensory perception, mobility, protective adaptations, and reproductive timing. These interactions drove innovation at an astonishing pace, ensuring that terrestrial ecosystems were vibrant, competitive, and endlessly varied. The rise of terrestrial life also allowed for the establishment of ecological hierarchies and interdependence in ways that were previously impossible. Plants and fungi provided habitats, food, and microenvironments for other organisms. Herbivores transformed vegetation patterns, influencing soil stability and nutrient cycles. Predators shaped population dynamics, promoting diversity through selective pressures. The terrestrial landscape became a living mosaic, where every species affected the success of others, and survival depended on the ability to navigate both biological and physical complexity. From a philosophical standpoint, the colonization of land demonstrates evolution's capacity to transform limitations into opportunities. Constraints, gravity, desiccation, variable temperatures, were not insurmountable obstacles but catalysts for innovation. Organisms developed new structures, behaviors, and strategies that enabled them to thrive where few others could. Evolution, in this sense, is both opportunistic and inventive, constantly testing the limits of possibility and generating solutions to challenges that could not have been predicted. Life's journey onto land illustrates that survival is rarely a matter of chance alone, it is a continuous negotiation with the environment, shaped by pressure, opportunity, and adaptation. By the time complex terrestrial ecosystems were established, life had developed unprecedented diversity in form, function, and behavior. Forests, swamps, and plains became arenas of constant interaction, where sensory perception, movement, size, protective adaptations, and reproductive strategies converged to determine survival. The colonization of land reshaped the evolutionary landscape, influencing not only the organisms themselves but the environments they inhabited. Terrestrial life was no longer simply an extension of the oceans, it was a new chapter in Earth's history, defined by complexity, interdependence, and relentless adaptation. Ultimately, the expansion onto land represents a pivotal moment in life's ongoing story. Organisms demonstrated resilience, creativity, and flexibility, evolving solutions to challenges that were both immediate and long-term. From structural innovations to behavioral strategies, life adapted to a world of extremes, proving that evolution is not merely reactive but exploratory, capable of producing extraordinary diversity from necessity. The terrestrial frontier became both a laboratory and a proving ground, preparing life for the next waves of complexity, interaction, and transformation that would continue for hundreds of millions of years. As terrestrial life flourished, another evolutionary revolution quietly reshaped the trajectory of life, the rise of vertebrates. In the oceans, early fish had already developed backbones, providing structural support, protection, and coordination for movement. Yet the full potential of vertebrate design only began to manifest when these animals ventured onto land. The backbone, along with associated skeletal structures, allowed for larger bodies, more complex movements, and greater coordination between limbs and muscles. This anatomical innovation became the foundation upon which terrestrial dominance could be built, enabling vertebrates to explore niches previously inaccessible to soft-bodied or exoskeleton-bearing organisms. The transition to land for vertebrates demanded radical physiological adaptations. Lungs replaced gills, enabling respiration in air, while circulatory systems became more sophisticated to deliver oxygen efficiently to tissues. Limbs evolved from fins, allowing walking, climbing, and burrowing. Vertebrate skin developed mechanisms to retain moisture and protect against environmental extremes. Each adaptation reflected a delicate balance between structure, function, and environment, illustrating that survival was not a single innovation but a coordinated suite of evolutionary changes. Together, these adaptations allowed vertebrates to exploit a variety of terrestrial habitats with remarkable efficiency. Predation and defense were central drivers of vertebrate evolution. As vertebrates moved onto land, they encountered new challenges and opportunities. Larger bodies offered protection and strength but also required more energy and resources. Sensory systems became increasingly refined, with eyes, ears, and olfactory structures providing critical information about predators, prey, and mates. Vertebrates engaged in an intricate evolutionary dialogue with their environment, where every movement, decision, and strategy had consequences for survival. The integration of perception, locomotion, and cognition marked a turning point, creating organisms capable of sophisticated behavior and adaptability. Reproduction presented another evolutionary challenge that vertebrates met with innovation. Amphibians, some of the earliest vertebrates to colonize land, relied on water for reproduction, laying eggs in aquatic environments. Over time, vertebrates evolved strategies to reproduce entirely on land, including amniotic eggs that protected embryos from desiccation. Parental care, nest building, and social behaviors further enhanced reproductive success, ensuring that offspring had a greater chance of reaching maturity. These reproductive innovations allowed vertebrates to expand into previously inaccessible habitats, driving further diversification and ecological influence. The rise of vertebrates also reshaped ecosystems in profound ways. Large herbivores altered vegetation patterns, influencing soil composition, nutrient cycling, and the structure of habitats. Predatory vertebrates regulated populations of smaller animals, maintaining ecological balance and promoting biodiversity. Vertebrates themselves became prey for larger predators, creating complex food webs that interconnected species across multiple trophic levels. Their presence amplified selective pressures, accelerating evolution for both vertebrates and invertebrates, and establishing dynamic ecosystems characterized by interdependence, competition, and adaptation. From a philosophical perspective, the emergence of vertebrates demonstrates the interplay between opportunity and constraint in evolution. Backbones, limbs, lungs, and sensory organs were not predetermined, they arose as solutions to specific challenges, yet collectively enabled life to explore forms, behaviors, and habitats previously impossible. Vertebrates exemplify how incremental innovations, accumulated over millions of years, can transform the potential of an entire lineage. They illustrate that evolution is both reactive and generative, producing outcomes that are unpredictable yet exquisitely suited to the challenges of survival. Vertebrates also pioneered behavioral complexity, setting the stage for intelligence, learning, and social interaction. Coordinated hunting, territoriality, mating displays, and communication began to emerge, demonstrating that anatomical innovations were inseparable from behavioral adaptations. Survival was no longer merely a matter of strength, speed, or protective structures, it required strategy, timing, and the ability to respond to a changing environment. Vertebrates became active participants in shaping their own evolutionary trajectory, influencing not only their survival but the evolution of countless other species. By the time vertebrates fully established themselves on land, they had transformed terrestrial ecosystems. They were architects, predators, and consumers, shaping landscapes, influencing ecological dynamics, and driving evolutionary innovation across entire communities. Their success reflected a synergy of anatomy, physiology, behavior, and environmental interaction, highlighting that evolution is not a single event but a continuous, multifaceted process. Vertebrates exemplified the potential for life to grow larger, move more dynamically, and engage in complex ecological and behavioral networks. Ultimately, the rise of vertebrates represents one of the most profound chapters in life's history. From structural innovations like backbones and limbs to physiological, sensory, and reproductive adaptations, vertebrates exemplified the power of coordinated evolutionary change. They not only survived but reshaped ecosystems, drove diversification, and laid the foundation for increasingly complex interactions. In vertebrates, we see the convergence of anatomy, behavior, and opportunity, illustrating evolution's relentless drive to explore new possibilities, master new environments, and extend the boundaries of life in ways that would echo for hundreds of millions of years. As vertebrates expanded across the land, another transformative development began to reshape the trajectory of life: the evolution of warm-bloodedness, or endothermy. Early terrestrial vertebrates relied heavily on environmental temperatures to regulate body functions, restricting activity to certain times of day and specific climates. However, the emergence of endothermy allowed organisms to maintain a stable internal temperature regardless of the external environment. This innovation unlocked unprecedented opportunities. Vertebrates could remain active in cooler climates, forage for longer periods, and colonize regions previously inhospitable. Warm-bloodedness became a game-changing adaptation, driving survival, diversification, and ecological dominance. Endothermy required profound physiological innovations. Metabolic rates increased significantly, demanding more energy and more efficient ways of obtaining and processing food. Cardiovascular systems became more sophisticated, distributing oxygen and nutrients rapidly to meet elevated demands. Respiratory systems expanded capacity, and insulating structures such as fur, feathers, or fat layers evolved to conserve heat. Every aspect of an organism's biology, digestion, circulation, respiration, and even behavior, was influenced by this thermoregulatory leap, illustrating the interdependence of physiology and environmental adaptation. Life was no longer bound to the rhythm of the sun or the ambient temperature. It could move, hunt, and reproduce with autonomy. The advantages of endothermy were profound and multifaceted. Organisms could remain active during cooler nights or seasons, extending foraging time and improving survival odds. Predatory strategies became more sophisticated. Endurance hunting, stealth, and coordinated group behavior became feasible when temperature no longer dictated activity levels. Prey animals, too, benefited, evolving rapid escape responses and nocturnal habits to exploit their newly active metabolic capabilities. Warm-bloodedness was not simply a physiological change, it transformed behavior, strategy, and the very dynamics of ecosystems. Endothermy also facilitated expansion into previously inaccessible habitats. Cooler highlands, polar regions, and arid environments suddenly became viable for colonization. Life was no longer strictly limited to temperate or tropical zones. The evolutionary consequences of this expansion were immense: geographic isolation, adaptation to extreme conditions, and diversification into a multitude of ecological niches accelerated speciation. Warm-blooded organisms became both drivers and beneficiaries of ecological complexity, reshaping food webs, resource distribution, and competitive interactions. The landscape of life expanded not only in space but in opportunity. Energy demands associated with endothermy had a profound influence on diet and foraging. To sustain high metabolic rates, organisms required nutrient-dense food sources and efficient hunting or gathering strategies. Predators became more active, intelligent, and strategic, while herbivores developed specialized digestive systems and foraging behaviors to meet caloric needs. This interplay between energy requirements and ecological behavior created a feedback loop in which physiology, behavior, and environmental pressures continually shaped one another. Endothermy exemplifies the intricate balance between biology and ecology, illustrating how a single adaptation can ripple across multiple dimensions of life. From a philosophical perspective, the evolution of endothermy underscores life's capacity to redefine its own boundaries. Whereas organisms had previously been constrained by the external environment, they now generated internal conditions that allowed freedom of action. Life was no longer entirely reactive, it could shape the terms of its existence. This shift exemplifies a central principle of evolution: adaptations that provide autonomy, flexibility, and resilience are not merely advantageous, they can redefine the potential trajectory of an entire lineage. Endothermy was not just survival, it was empowerment. Warm-bloodedness also fostered behavioral sophistication. Sustained activity allowed more complex social interactions, territoriality, mating rituals, and parental care. Organisms could respond dynamically to changing circumstances, exploit transient opportunities, and develop strategies that required endurance and coordination. Intelligence and learning were reinforced by the physiological capacity to remain active and alert, linking metabolic innovation with cognitive and social evolution. The foundation for advanced behaviors, later evident in mammals and birds, was laid through this critical adaptation. By establishing endothermy, vertebrates dramatically expanded the range, resilience, and ecological influence of life on land. They could thrive across diverse climates, remain active under conditions that once limited survival, and engage in behaviors that reshaped ecosystems. Predators and prey alike became more sophisticated, energy demands shaped foraging and diet, and social complexity increased. The combination of physiological innovation and ecological consequence illustrates evolution's power to drive life toward new frontiers, both physically and behaviorally. Ultimately, the rise of warm-blooded vertebrates represents a milestone in life's continuous struggle for survival and dominance. It illustrates how a single adaptation, metabolic autonomy, can ripple through morphology, behavior, ecology, and evolutionary potential. Life was no longer constrained by the clock of the environment, it had, in a sense, learned to generate its own rhythm. Endothermy became a foundation upon which intelligence, endurance, and ecological versatility could flourish, shaping the trajectory of evolution for hundreds of millions of years and setting the stage for the emergence of mammals, birds, and eventually humans. The evolution of warm-blooded vertebrates marked a critical turning point in life's journey, but the story of survival and adaptation was far from complete. With endothermy, vertebrates had unlocked unprecedented ecological opportunities, but thriving in terrestrial landscapes required more than the regulation of body temperature. It demanded complex social structures, cognitive sophistication, and behavioral innovation. As ecosystems matured, competition intensified, predation strategies evolved, and the interplay between organisms became increasingly intricate. Life on land was no longer simply a question of endurance or mobility, it had entered an era defined by intelligence, planning, and cooperation. The stage was set for the emergence of mammals, a lineage that would eventually carry the story of life into realms of unprecedented complexity and adaptability. Early mammalian ancestors were small, nocturnal creatures, inhabiting shadowy niches that offered protection from dominant reptiles and predators of the day. Their survival depended on subtle adaptations, keen senses of smell and hearing, refined tactile perception, and behaviors that balanced risk with opportunity. These small mammals were both cautious and innovative, exploiting food sources overlooked by larger organisms, navigating complex microhabitats, and avoiding predators with strategies that demanded awareness, agility, and coordination. In many ways, their subtle sophistication was a precursor to the more pronounced cognitive developments that would emerge in later mammalian lineages. The survival of these small mammals demonstrates that evolutionary success is not solely the product of size or strength, intelligence, perception, and strategic behavior can provide equally profound advantages. The development of complex sensory systems in mammals played a crucial role in shaping evolutionary trajectories. Vision adapted to low-light conditions, allowing nocturnal mammals to hunt or forage when diurnal predators were inactive. Hearing became finely tuned, capable of detecting subtle variations in pitch and rhythm, signaling both threats and opportunities in the environment. Olfactory capabilities expanded, enabling mammals to track food, identify territory, and communicate chemically with one another. Even touch became a critical sensory channel, with whiskers and other specialized structures providing real-time feedback about immediate surroundings. The integration of these senses allowed mammals to perceive and respond to their environment with a level of precision and adaptability unprecedented among vertebrates of their time. Behavioral complexity evolved hand-in-hand with sensory sophistication. Early mammals exhibited patterns of sociality, communication, and learning that laid the foundation for later cooperative strategies. While solitary habits dominated, interactions with conspecifics involved subtle forms of signaling, territorial marking, and parental investment. The ability to learn from experience, avoiding dangerous areas, recognizing predatory behaviors, and exploiting resource patterns, became increasingly important for survival. Cognitive flexibility allowed mammals to adapt to changing environments more readily than less behaviorally sophisticated organisms, and over generations, these learning capacities became deeply embedded in evolutionary strategies. This combination of sensory awareness and behavioral flexibility illustrates a central principle of evolution. Survival is often determined not solely by brute force, but by the ability to perceive, interpret, and respond to complex stimuli in real time. Reproduction was another arena where mammals began to distinguish themselves from their evolutionary predecessors. Internal gestation and live birth, along with extended parental care, represented a profound shift in life history strategies. Offspring could develop within a protected environment, reducing vulnerability to environmental hazards and predation. Parents invested energy in nurturing, teaching, and protecting young, increasing their survival probability and allowing the transmission of behaviors alongside genetic material. This reproductive strategy fostered stronger family units, promoted the development of social learning, and provided a platform for the evolution of intelligence, cooperation, and long-term survival strategies. Life was no longer merely a sequence of immediate survival challenges, it became an investment in future generations, with survival strategies extending across time as well as space. The ecological role of early mammals, while initially subtle, grew increasingly influential as ecosystems evolved. Herbivorous mammals began to shape vegetation patterns through selective feeding, while carnivorous species regulated prey populations, maintaining ecological balance. Their nocturnal activity patterns and mobility allowed them to exploit resources that were unavailable to larger, diurnal reptiles, providing an evolutionary foothold that would persist for millions of years. The presence of mammals created new selective pressures for other organisms as well, initiating feedback loops that accelerated the pace of evolutionary innovation across entire ecosystems. Mammals were not merely participants, they became active architects of their ecological landscape, influencing both the distribution of resources and the evolutionary trajectories of other species. Cognition and problem-solving began to play increasingly significant roles as mammals diversified. Navigating complex habitats, identifying food sources, avoiding predators, and communicating with conspecifics required more than instinct, it demanded reasoning, memory, and adaptability. Spatial awareness, pattern recognition, and social intelligence became tools for survival, shaping behaviors that enhanced individual and group fitness. Mammals capable of anticipating threats, recalling resource locations, or coordinating with others were more likely to thrive, illustrating how intelligence itself became a selective advantage. Over millions of years, this interplay between cognition and survival would produce lineages with remarkable behavioral flexibility, laying the groundwork for advanced problem-solving and, eventually, human intelligence. The evolution of mammals was also influenced by environmental upheavals, which punctuated Earth's history with cycles of extinction and opportunity. Climate fluctuations, continental shifts, and catastrophic events periodically reshaped habitats, wiping out dominant species while opening niches for survivors. Small, adaptable mammals proved resilient, exploiting opportunities that arose in the wake of mass extinctions. Their survival was a testament to the power of flexibility, behavioral sophistication, and reproductive strategy in navigating uncertainty. Evolution, in this sense, is both opportunistic and selective. Those capable of adjusting to rapid change are often the lineages that endure, while rigid or highly specialized species may falter when conditions shift. Over time, mammalian diversification accelerated, producing a staggering variety of forms adapted to nearly every ecological niche on land, in water, and even in the air. Herbivores specialized in grazing or browsing, carnivores in ambush or pursuit predation, and omnivores exploited multiple food sources. Arboreal, terrestrial, and subterranean lifestyles emerged, reflecting the vast adaptive potential of mammals. This diversification was not merely a product of opportunity, it was facilitated by the evolutionary foundations established earlier: endothermy, sensory sophistication, behavioral flexibility, and reproductive innovation. Each adaptation reinforced the others, creating a self-reinforcing trajectory that allowed mammals to dominate multiple ecological landscapes. Philosophically, the rise of mammals highlights the interplay between incremental adaptation and emergent complexity. Small, nocturnal, and relatively inconspicuous at first, early mammals gradually transformed ecosystems and life's evolutionary possibilities through a combination of physiology, behavior, and cognition. Evolution is rarely about sudden leaps, it is a slow, accumulative process, where minor innovations, when combined, create profound long-term effects. Mammals demonstrate how persistence, adaptability, and subtlety can yield dominance across millions of years, illustrating that the evolutionary narrative is both patient and opportunistic, shaped by countless interactions between organism, environment, and circumstance. The story of mammals also underscores the importance of intergenerational knowledge, encoded not just genetically but behaviorally. Social learning, memory, and parental guidance became integral to survival, allowing mammals to navigate complex landscapes and exploit resources more efficiently. In this way, evolution was not simply producing organisms adapted to immediate conditions, it was creating lineages capable of transmitting strategies, behaviors, and innovations across generations. Life became both reactive and proactive, capable of shaping its own evolutionary trajectory in ways that pure instinct could not achieve. As mammals spread and diversified, their influence became increasingly global. They transformed ecosystems, exerted selective pressures on plants and other animals, and contributed to the creation of complex, interdependent food webs. From the smallest shrew to the largest prehistoric megafauna, mammals exemplified the capacity for life to innovate, adapt, and dominate across diverse environments. Each lineage reflected a history of incremental change, experimentation, and adaptation, revealing evolution as both a process of survival and a driver of complexity, intelligence, and ecological influence. Ultimately, the rise of mammals represents more than a single evolutionary success story, it embodies the culmination of millions of years of adaptation, resilience, and innovation. From small nocturnal creatures to the architects of modern ecosystems, mammals illustrate how life continuously adapts to environmental challenges, develops new strategies for survival, and reshapes the very landscapes it inhabits. Their journey demonstrates that evolution is not merely a struggle for existence but a process of expansion, refinement, and increasing complexity, a testament to life's relentless drive to endure, adapt, and flourish in an ever-changing world. The story of mammals is only a chapter in the greater narrative of life's continuous struggle for survival and adaptation. As the Cretaceous period gave way to the Paleogene, the planet witnessed one of the most dramatic events in its history, the mass extinction that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs. For millions of years, these giant reptiles had dominated terrestrial ecosystems, shaping the evolution of plants, animals, and the very landscapes they inhabited. Their sudden disappearance, triggered by a combination of catastrophic events, most notably a massive asteroid impact, left an ecological vacuum of unprecedented scale. For mammals, this was both a crisis and an unparalleled opportunity. What had once been a hidden, shadowed lineage, surviving under the dominance of reptiles, suddenly found itself in a world brimming with unclaimed niches, untapped resources, and the potential to diversify in ways that had previously been impossible. Before this cataclysm, mammals had largely remained small and nocturnal, navigating an ecosystem dominated by creatures many times their size and complexity. These constraints shaped early mammalian evolution, favoring traits that allowed them to hide, forage quietly, and reproduce efficiently without drawing attention from apex predators. Their small size, high metabolism, and capacity for endothermy were already advantages, but they had not yet been fully tested or expressed in the full potential of mammalian diversity. Survival under such conditions required a delicate balance: stealth, efficiency, sensory acuity, and the ability to exploit microhabitats that larger competitors could not access. In essence, these early mammals were masters of subtlety, honing adaptations that would later serve as the foundation for their future success. The mass extinction event, however, altered the selective landscape overnight. Entire groups of organisms vanished, drastically reshaping the available ecological niches. Forests, plains, and wetlands suddenly existed without the large herbivores that had shaped them for millions of years. Predatory pressures decreased dramatically, while food resources became abundant and underutilized. Mammals were no longer constrained to shadowy nocturnal activity. They could explore the full dimensions of ecosystems, expanding their size, behavior, and ecological influence. Evolution, always opportunistic, responded with remarkable speed. The survivors radiated into this new world, exploring forms, behaviors, and strategies that had previously been impossible under the reign of dinosaurs. The Paleogene period marked the beginning of what paleontologists call the Age of Mammals. Within millions of years, mammalian lineages diversified at an extraordinary pace, filling niches left empty by extinct reptiles. Some evolved into massive herbivores capable of grazing on new types of vegetation. Others became apex predators, developing strength, agility, and cunning that allowed them to dominate terrestrial food webs. Small mammals, previously restricted to insectivory or scavenging, explored arboreal, burrowing, and aquatic lifestyles, expanding the very concept of what a mammal could be. In this period, life demonstrated its unparalleled adaptability. Traits that had once been constrained by environmental and competitive pressures were now liberated to explore evolutionary potential fully. Anatomical and physiological innovations accelerated alongside this diversification. The skeletons of mammals became increasingly specialized, reflecting adaptations for speed, endurance, climbing, digging, and swimming. Limbs elongated or shortened depending on ecological needs. Claws, teeth, and dentition evolved in direct response to dietary pressures. Sensory systems, already sophisticated, became more acute, facilitating complex hunting strategies, social communication, and environmental awareness. Brain size increased in many lineages, supporting heightened cognitive abilities, problem-solving, and social complexity. The combination of physical, sensory, and cognitive adaptations transformed mammals into a group capable of dominating nearly every terrestrial ecosystem on the planet. Behavior, too, became a critical axis of mammalian success. Social structures emerged, from simple group foraging to intricate hierarchies and cooperative breeding. Parental care, already present in early mammals, evolved into extended nurturing periods, social learning, and even cultural transmission in some species. Communication systems developed, including vocalizations, body language, scent marking, and coordinated group behavior. These behavioral innovations enhanced survival by increasing foraging efficiency, predator avoidance, and reproductive success. Evolution had shifted from purely physical adaptations to the integration of cognition, sociality, and environmental manipulation. The ecological impact of this mammalian radiation was profound. Large herbivores transformed landscapes through grazing, browsing, and trampling, shaping plant communities and influencing soil composition. Predators regulated populations of smaller animals, maintaining balance and driving evolutionary pressures in prey species. Even the smallest mammals acted as ecological engineers. Burrowing altered soil structure, seed dispersal promoted plant diversity, and foraging behaviors influenced insect populations. Ecosystems became complex tapestries of interdependent species, with mammals often at the center as both agents and beneficiaries of these interactions. Life had evolved beyond simple survival. It had begun to actively shape the environment. Evolutionary experimentation during this period also produced surprising forms. Mammals explored extreme sizes, from tiny shrews weighing mere grams to elephants and other megafauna surpassing several tons. Arboreal mammals developed prehensile tails, specialized limb structures, and adaptations for navigating dense forests. Aquatic mammals returned to water, evolving streamlined bodies, flippers, and sophisticated echolocation systems in some lineages. The diversity of mammalian form and function illustrates evolution's capacity for innovation when selective pressures align with opportunity. The extinction of dinosaurs did not merely remove competitors, it created a laboratory for life to explore the full spectrum of possibility. Yet, this period was not without challenges. Climate fluctuations, changing sea levels, and tectonic activity continually reshaped habitats, forcing mammals to adapt or migrate. Competition within mammalian lineages intensified as niches were filled, driving further specialization and divergence. Predation, disease, and resource scarcity remained constant pressures, demonstrating that opportunity is inseparable from risk. Mammals thrived not because the world was suddenly safe, but because their evolutionary toolkit allowed them to exploit opportunities with flexibility, intelligence, and adaptability. Life's success required constant vigilance, responsiveness, and innovation. Philosophically, the rise of mammals after the dinosaur extinction illustrates the nature of contingency in evolution. The dominance of mammals was not inevitable, it was the product of chance, resilience, and the ability to seize opportunity. Evolution is a process of both constraint and potential, shaped by environmental shifts, random events, and the cumulative effects of prior adaptations. Mammals exemplify how lineages can persist under adversity, accumulate advantageous traits, and capitalize on moments of disruption to achieve unprecedented success. This narrative challenges simplistic notions of progress or inevitability in evolution, highlighting instead the interplay of chance, adaptation, and persistence. The Paleogene mammalian radiation also set the stage for complex ecological interactions that continue today. Plant-animal coevolution flourished, with herbivores influencing floral evolution and plants in turn shaping feeding strategies. Predatory-prey dynamics became increasingly sophisticated, fostering the evolution of camouflage, speed, social cooperation, and defensive behaviors. Ecosystems became self-reinforcing networks, where each species' adaptations influenced the evolution of others, creating feedback loops that accelerated complexity. Mammals were both participants and architects in this process, demonstrating that life evolves not in isolation but through dynamic interactions with the environment and other organisms. Over millions of years, mammals diversified further, giving rise to orders that would dominate modern ecosystems. Carnivora became highly specialized predators, cetacea conquered the oceans once more, developing intelligence, echolocation, and complex social structures. Primates evolved dexterity, depth perception, and problem-solving capabilities. Ungulates became the foundation of grassland ecosystems. The evolution of mammals illustrates a principle that echoes throughout life's history: adaptability, innovation, and integration of multiple traits create resilience and opportunity. Mammals did not merely survive the extinction of dinosaurs, they redefined terrestrial life in profound and lasting ways. Human evolution, though far in the future, is rooted in this post-extinction mammalian radiation. The intelligence, dexterity, social behavior, and metabolic traits that would define our species were refined over millions of years within this evolutionary context. Endothermy, parental care, sensory acuity, and cognitive complexity, developed incrementally in early mammals, created the potential for higher intelligence, tool use, and social learning. Our story is a continuation of this long chain of adaptation, innovation, and ecological interaction, linking the present directly to the ancient struggle for survival that defined the age of mammals. In conclusion, the mammalian radiation following the extinction of the dinosaurs is a testament to life's resilience, adaptability, and capacity for innovation. From small, nocturnal survivors to the diverse forms that dominate terrestrial ecosystems today, mammals illustrate how evolution exploits opportunity, integrates multiple traits, and shapes the environment in return. Their rise demonstrates the interplay between contingency, adaptation, and ecological interaction, highlighting evolution as a process of exploration, experimentation, and relentless creativity. Life, through mammals, transformed the planet in ways that would echo through millions of years, ultimately setting the stage for the emergence of humans and the complex, interconnected ecosystems that define our world today. Mammals' journey from shadows to dominance is a profound chapter in life's continuous struggle, underscoring the power of chance, resilience, and the relentless drive to survive, adapt, and thrive. With the rise of mammalian intelligence, the evolutionary stage was set for an extraordinary chapter in Earth's history, the emergence of primates and, eventually, humans. Primates evolved as small, arboreal mammals, navigating a complex three-dimensional environment among trees, branches, and canopies. Life in the trees demanded remarkable sensory acuity, balance, coordination, and cognitive ability. Vision became increasingly acute, with depth perception critical for judging distances and planning leaps between branches. Hands evolved with dexterity and opposable thumbs, enabling grasping, manipulation, and interaction with the environment in ways no other mammal had achieved. These adaptations were not merely functional, they were the foundation for intelligence, problem-solving, and complex social behavior. Arboreal life, with its constant challenges, acted as a crucible for cognitive evolution, refining skills that would eventually define human potential. Living in trees also created social pressures that shaped behavior. Primates often existed in social groups, where cooperation, communication, and hierarchy were essential for survival. Grooming, alliance building, and social learning became central to maintaining group cohesion and ensuring individual success. Social complexity demanded sophisticated communication, facial expressions, vocalizations, and gestures conveyed meaning, reinforced bonds, and mediated conflict. Cognitive evolution was thus intertwined with social life. Intelligence was not just a tool for manipulating the environment, it was a means of navigating relationships, alliances, and competition within groups. Survival depended as much on social skill as on physical ability. Dietary pressures further fueled primate innovation. Fruit, leaves, insects, and small animals were unevenly distributed, requiring memory, planning, and spatial awareness to locate and acquire resources. Foraging behaviors became intricate, with individuals developing strategies to exploit seasonal availability, avoid competition, and maximize energy intake. Tool use emerged as a natural extension of this intelligence. Simple tools, sticks for probing termite mounds, stones for cracking nuts, demonstrated foresight, problem-solving, and the capacity for environmental manipulation. These early innovations, modest by human standards, were nonetheless transformative, illustrating that cognition could influence survival in profound ways. Over millions of years, primates diversified into numerous species, adapting to forests, savannas, and other habitats. Some lineages became more terrestrial, while others retained arboreal lifestyles. Each ecological niche demanded unique adaptations. Limb proportions, locomotion styles, dentition, and sensory abilities evolved in response to environmental pressures. Throughout this process, intelligence, social behavior, and tool use became increasingly important for survival. Cognitive evolution did not follow a linear path, it was shaped by the interplay of opportunity, necessity, and ecological constraint, creating a diversity of behavioral and anatomical strategies across species. Among primates, the hominin lineage eventually emerged, characterized by bipedalism, increasing brain size, and complex social structures. Walking upright freed the hands for manipulation, tool-making, and carrying objects. Energy efficiency improved for long-distance travel, while vantage points allowed better environmental awareness and threat detection. Bipedalism represented a profound shift in the relationship between body, environment, and cognition. It enabled hominins to interact with their surroundings in novel ways, setting the stage for unprecedented behavioral and technological innovation. Life was no longer defined solely by survival in the immediate environment, it could now reshape the environment to suit its needs. Hominin evolution also saw the dramatic expansion of brain capacity. The neocortex, responsible for higher cognitive functions such as reasoning, planning, and social understanding, grew substantially. Language, abstract thought, and memory became increasingly sophisticated. These developments allowed for cumulative culture, in which knowledge, tools, and strategies could be passed across generations, accelerating adaptation and innovation beyond the limits of genetic evolution alone. Social learning became a powerful driver of survival, enabling hominins to exploit resources, avoid danger, and collaborate in ways that no other species had achieved. Toolmaking reached a level of precision and intentionality unprecedented in the animal kingdom. Early stone tools, initially simple flakes and cores, became more complex over time, reflecting foresight, planning, and problem-solving. The ability to modify the environment, cutting, scraping, pounding, extended the reach of human survival, allowing hominins to access previously unattainable resources. Fire, eventually harnessed, provided warmth, protection, and a means to cook food, amplifying energy efficiency and health. These innovations illustrate that humans are not merely products of evolution, they are active participants in shaping it, capable of altering ecosystems, behavior, and survival strategies in profound ways. Social evolution among hominins intensified cognitive demands. Complex communication, cooperation in hunting and gathering, and shared knowledge reinforced group cohesion and survival. Morality, empathy, and social norms began to emerge as behavioral adaptations to living in interconnected groups. Culture became a medium for transmitting information, reinforcing behaviors, and coordinating activities across time and space. Life was no longer a solitary contest, it became a networked endeavor, where success depended on collaboration, learning, and social intelligence. Survival, innovation, and adaptation became deeply intertwined with community. Environmental pressures continued to shape human evolution. Climate fluctuations, habitat changes, and resource scarcity required flexibility, innovation, and mobility. Hominins adapted to diverse landscapes, savannas, forests, deserts, and mountains, through both biological and cultural means. Clothing, shelter, hunting strategies, and social structures enabled humans to survive in regions that would have been inhospitable to other species. Evolution became a dialogue between biology and culture, where environmental challenges drove innovation, and innovation influenced survival, reproduction, and adaptation. The philosophical implications of hominin evolution are profound. Humans exemplify life's capacity not only to adapt but to anticipate, manipulate, and transform the environment. Evolution, once largely reactive, became interactive. Human intelligence and culture enabled life to alter selective pressures, reshape ecosystems, and create technologies that extend the boundaries of survival. This demonstrates that evolution is not a static process but a dynamic interplay of organism, environment, and behavior, where foresight and innovation can amplify survival potential far beyond physical adaptations alone. By the time Homo sapiens emerged, the cumulative effects of millions of years of evolution, from early multicellular organisms to primates and hominins, had created a species capable of extraordinary impact. Humans possessed intelligence, dexterity, social complexity, and technological ability unparalleled in the history of life. They could modify ecosystems, manipulate resources, and communicate across time and space. Life had evolved from simple cells responding to chemical gradients into conscious beings capable of reflection, creativity, and transformation. Evolution's journey had reached a point where the product could shape its own destiny and, in doing so, influence the survival and evolution of countless other species. Humans also demonstrate evolution's philosophical lesson, that survival is not solely about strength, speed, or size, but about integration of traits, innovation, and the capacity to learn. Intelligence, social cohesion, and adaptability became central to success. Life is not simply passive, it is proactive, capable of creating solutions to challenges and expanding possibilities. Humans illustrate the culmination of evolutionary processes that favor flexibility, innovation, and foresight, revealing that the trajectory of life is shaped not only by environmental pressures but by the creative capacities of the organisms themselves. The human impact on ecosystems highlights the transformative power of this lineage. Agriculture, urbanization, and technology have reshaped landscapes, altered climate patterns, and influenced the survival of innumerable species. Humans are both product and agent of evolution, embodying the intersection of biology, cognition, and culture. The story of life, from simple cells to complex social beings, finds its most visible expression in humans, who exemplify evolution's potential to generate intelligence, culture, and environmental mastery. Ultimately, the rise of humans represents both the continuation and the amplification of life's 4-billion-year struggle for survival. Every adaptation, from photosynthesis in ancient microbes to complex cognition in Homo sapiens, has built upon previous innovations, illustrating the cumulative, interconnected nature of evolution. Humans embody the intersection of biology, behavior, and culture, demonstrating that survival and adaptation are not purely physical phenomena but involve intelligence, foresight, and collaboration. Life has achieved a form capable of reflecting upon its own history, understanding its environment, and shaping its future. Evolution, far from stopping, continues in humans as both biological and cultural agents, extending the struggle for survival into realms unimaginable to the earliest forms of life. This trajectory underscores a central truth: evolution is relentless, continuous, and expansive. From the earliest cells to humans, life has demonstrated creativity, resilience, and adaptability. Each generation inherits not just genetic material but the accumulated innovations of the past, enabling exploration of new niches, behaviors, and environments. The story of humans is the latest chapter in a 4-billion-year narrative, revealing that life's capacity to adapt, innovate, and persist is boundless. In humans, evolution's ingenuity reaches its most visible, reflective, and transformative expression, illustrating that life's struggle for survival is not static but an ongoing, dynamic, and ever-unfolding process. As the evolutionary story of life continued, a remarkable chapter unfolded in which the seeds of humanity, along with countless other complex mammals, began to emerge in the African landscapes of the Miocene and Pliocene epochs. The rise of large mammals had created ecosystems that were not only physically complex but also cognitively and socially intricate. Within these systems, new selective pressures acted not only on body size, strength, and mobility but increasingly on intelligence, problem-solving, communication, and social cooperation. Evolution was accelerating in subtle but profound ways, setting the stage for organisms whose survival would depend not merely on instinct and physical prowess but on foresight, planning, and adaptive learning. In these fertile African savannas, life began to experiment with behaviors that would eventually lead to the emergence of the first hominins. Environmental pressures played a critical role in shaping these early mammalian ancestors. Africa was transforming from densely forested regions into more open savannas, punctuated by seasonal rivers, grasslands, and scattered woodlands. Food sources became patchier and less predictable. Survival increasingly depended on the ability to travel long distances in search of sustenance, detect predators across open terrain, and make rapid decisions about risk versus reward. These conditions created selective pressure favoring organisms that could integrate sensory information, remember locations, coordinate with others, and learn from past experiences. Early mammals and their primate relatives were beginning to demonstrate a profound link between environmental challenge and cognitive evolution. Primates, a lineage already distinguished by dexterous hands, forward-facing eyes, and large brains relative to body size, became particularly well-suited to exploit these changing environments. Vision in 3 dimensions allowed precise judgment of distances for climbing, leaping, and foraging. Dexterous hands enabled manipulation of objects, extraction of food, and eventually, the creation of rudimentary tools. These physical traits, combined with evolving social complexity, created an adaptive advantage in a world where cooperation, memory, and planning became increasingly valuable. Early primates could navigate both the trees and the emerging open spaces with greater flexibility than many contemporaneous mammals, giving them access to a diversity of resources and opportunities for experimentation in behavior. Social dynamics played a crucial role in shaping cognition. Living in groups offered protection from predators, improved efficiency in foraging, and allowed for cooperative care of young. Group living, however, also introduced new challenges: competition for mates, hierarchy negotiation, communication, and the development of social intelligence became essential for survival. Individuals who could recognize social cues, remember relationships, and anticipate the behavior of others had an evolutionary advantage. In this environment, intelligence and social complexity were selected alongside physical adaptations, highlighting that survival was no longer merely a matter of individual capability but also of relational skill, foresight, and strategy. As primates evolved, selective pressures increasingly favored traits that enhanced adaptability and problem-solving. Memory, reasoning, and learning became critical for identifying seasonal food sources, avoiding predators, and navigating complex social landscapes. Tool use, first rudimentary and opportunistic, allowed access to hard-to-reach food, defense against threats, and exploration of environmental resources. These behaviors were not genetically predetermined in detail but were facilitated by physical and cognitive adaptations that enabled innovation. The capacity for learning and adaptation began to amplify evolutionary success in ways that pure morphology alone could not achieve, demonstrating a profound shift in the mechanisms by which life could thrive. The emergence of bipedalism in early hominins illustrates the intricate interplay between environment, morphology, and behavior. Moving efficiently on two legs freed the hands for carrying food, using tools, and manipulating the environment. Bipedalism improved energy efficiency over long distances, critical for traversing expansive savannas in search of scattered resources. It also enhanced vigilance, allowing early hominins to scan for predators or competitors across open terrain. This adaptation reshaped anatomy, requiring changes in spine curvature, pelvis structure, limb proportions, and balance, while simultaneously influencing behavior, social coordination, and the ways in which individuals interacted with their environment. The evolution of diet in early hominins reflected both ecological pressures and cognitive sophistication. Opportunistic foraging led to the consumption of fruits, nuts, tubers, and eventually meat, often obtained through scavenging or cooperative hunting. Tool use facilitated access to food that was previously unavailable, while social cooperation allowed group strategies to emerge, such as coordinated scavenging or sharing of resources. These dietary adaptations had cascading effects on physiology. Larger brains required more energy, dentition evolved to process diverse foods, and social structures adapted to support the provisioning and care of group members. Nutrition, cognition, and social behavior became deeply intertwined, reinforcing the principle that evolution is an integrated process rather than a series of isolated changes. Communication, both verbal and nonverbal, began to take shape as a vital adaptation for social mammals and early hominins. Facial expressions, gestures, vocalizations, and eventually more complex forms of language enabled individuals to coordinate activities, convey danger, negotiate social hierarchies, and share knowledge. This capacity for communication reinforced social bonds and enhanced survival, creating a feedback loop in which cognitive and social skills were increasingly advantageous. As brains grew in size and complexity, so too did the capacity for learning, teaching, and cultural transmission, establishing a mechanism for behaviors and knowledge to influence evolution independently of genetics alone. The interplay between cognition, sociality, and environmental challenge also drove innovation. Early hominins learned to use tools not only to access food but to defend themselves, manipulate landscapes, and interact with objects in novel ways. Observational learning allowed these behaviors to spread within groups, accelerating the pace of cultural evolution. Unlike genetic evolution, which operates across millennia, learned behaviors could be transmitted within generations, allowing rapid adaptation to environmental pressures. Intelligence became both a survival tool and an evolutionary accelerator, demonstrating that life could evolve strategies that extended beyond biological constraints. Predation, competition, and cooperation created a complex evolutionary landscape. Early hominins were simultaneously prey, foragers, and innovators, navigating threats from large carnivores while exploiting environmental resources. Group coordination, memory, and problem-solving conferred advantages, but so too did caution, flexibility, and the ability to adapt quickly to unforeseen challenges. This multidimensional selection pressure reinforced both cognitive and social development, illustrating that evolution operates on multiple levels simultaneously: physiological, behavioral, social, and ecological. Each adaptation opened new opportunities while also creating new challenges, perpetuating a cycle of innovation, trial, and refinement. Over time, these cumulative adaptations, bipedalism, tool use, social intelligence, communication, and dietary flexibility, set the stage for the rise of Homo. Early humans would inherit an evolutionary legacy defined by resilience, ingenuity, and the capacity to shape their environment in unprecedented ways. Unlike other organisms, whose adaptations primarily responded to environmental pressures, early humans began to exert agency over their surroundings, manipulating landscapes, developing technology, and forming complex societies. Evolution had laid the groundwork for a species capable of both remarkable creativity and profound ecological impact, demonstrating life's capacity not only to survive but to redefine the terms of survival itself. Philosophically, the rise of hominins underscores life's unique capacity for self-directed evolution. While natural selection continues to operate, intelligence allows anticipation, planning, and innovation, creating a feedback loop in which behavior influences both survival and future adaptation. Life was no longer purely reactive; it could now shape its own trajectory, manipulate environments, and transmit knowledge independently of genetics. This stage of evolution represents a profound expansion in the possibilities of life, where cognition, culture, and foresight become central tools for survival and transformation. By the time early Homo species spread across Africa and beyond, the foundations of modern ecosystems, social structures, and cultural systems were being established. Tool use, social cooperation, and environmental manipulation demonstrated that intelligence was an adaptive advantage on a scale unmatched by prior physical adaptations alone. The combination of morphology, cognition, and sociality created a lineage capable of unprecedented exploration, innovation, and ecological influence. Life had reached a new frontier, one where survival was intertwined with creativity, foresight, and the capacity to alter both the self and the environment. Ultimately, the evolutionary journey from early mammals to hominins exemplifies the continuity, creativity, and resilience of life over billions of years. Each adaptation, physiological, behavioral, or cognitive, built upon previous innovations, demonstrating the cumulative power of evolution. Environmental pressures, social complexity, and ecological opportunity interacted in ways that favored intelligence, cooperation, and innovation. Early hominins inherited this legacy, becoming agents of both adaptation and environmental transformation. This narrative illustrates that evolution is not merely survival of the fittest in a physical sense but an ongoing, multifaceted process in which life continuously experiments, innovates, and expands the possibilities of existence. In the story of hominin evolution, we see the culmination of billions of years of life's relentless drive, to survive, to adapt, and to explore new frontiers of possibility with each successive generation. As the Earth continued its ceaseless cycles of change, mammals not only survived but became architects of increasingly complex ecosystems, culminating in an unprecedented stage of life's history, the emergence of early humans. This stage represents a culmination of billions of years of adaptation, innovation, and interaction between organism and environment. While mammals had dominated the land through size, intelligence, and social coordination, the appearance of hominins introduced a new dimension to evolution: self-awareness, symbolic thought, and the capacity to manipulate the environment in profound ways. The story of early humans is not separate from the broader narrative of life; it is a continuation, a reflection of the cumulative pressures, innovations, and opportunities that had shaped every lineage that came before. From the development of upright posture to tool use, from social cooperation to the emergence of culture, early humans exemplify evolution's most intricate and self-referential expressions. Bipedalism, one of the earliest hallmarks of human evolution, was both a response to and a driver of environmental adaptation. Shifts in climate and habitat during the late Miocene and Pliocene which saw forests reseed and grasslands expand in East Africa, placed selective pressure on early primates. Those capable of upright locomotion could traverse longer distances efficiently, spot predators over tall grasses, and carry food and tools. Bipedalism restructured skeletal anatomy, altering the pelvis, spine, and lower limbs in ways that facilitated endurance walking and running. This adaptation provided a unique blend of mobility, energy efficiency, and environmental awareness. It was more than a physical change, it represented a shift in perspective, literally elevating the organism to a new vantage point from which to interpret and interact with the world. The hands, freed from the constraints of locomotion, became instruments of profound evolutionary importance. Dexterity enabled early humans to manipulate objects, craft tools, and interact with their environment in ways no other species could. Stones could be shaped into cutting implements, sticks used for probing or hunting, and eventually more sophisticated tools allowed the transformation of raw materials into functional technology. Tool use did not merely solve immediate survival challenges, it created new ecological and social opportunities. Organisms could access previously unreachable food sources, defend themselves more effectively, and communicate knowledge through shared techniques. The development of manual precision was thus inseparable from cognitive and cultural evolution, demonstrating the interconnectedness of physical, behavioral, and intellectual traits. Cognition evolved alongside tool use, reflecting the reciprocal relationship between environment, behavior, and brain development. Enlarged brains, particularly the neocortex, allowed for complex problem-solving, planning, and memory. Early humans could anticipate environmental changes, coordinate group activities, and adapt strategies to exploit resources. This intellectual capacity was reinforced by social structures. Cooperation, communication, and learning became as crucial as physical strength for survival. Life, which had long been a negotiation with environmental pressures, now incorporated foresight, innovation, and shared knowledge. Survival was increasingly contingent on the capacity to think, anticipate, and teach, marking a profound shift from instinct-driven life to strategic, culturally mediated existence. Social behavior in early humans was transformative. Group cohesion provided protection, facilitated resource acquisition, and created networks of support that enhanced survival for both adults and offspring. Communication evolved, initially through gestures, vocalizations, and eventually symbolic language, enabling the sharing of knowledge, warnings, and plans. Social intelligence became an evolutionary advantage. The ability to interpret intentions, remember relationships, and cooperate strategically allowed humans to outcompete other species, adapt to challenging environments, and transmit skills across generations. The emergence of social complexity demonstrates that intelligence alone is insufficient without interaction. Cognition must be embedded in a cooperative, responsive system to exert its full evolutionary power. Fire, one of humanity's most transformative discoveries, illustrates the interplay of environmental opportunity and cognitive innovation. Mastery of fire provided warmth, protection, and a means to cook food, increasing nutritional intake and expanding dietary options. Cooked food allowed easier digestion and calorie extraction, supporting the energetic demands of larger brains. Fire also extended activity into the night, enabling social gatherings, planning, and cultural expression around communal hearths. This innovation, while technological, had profound biological, behavioral, and social consequences, reflecting evolution's capacity to integrate multiple adaptive dimensions into a single, transformative process. Environmental adaptation remained central to human evolution. Early hominins confronted dramatic shifts in climate, vegetation, and resource availability. Those capable of flexible foraging, seasonal migration, and resource storage had a survival advantage. Ecological awareness became intertwined with cognition and social behavior, as early humans learned to read landscapes, predict animal movements, and exploit seasonal patterns. This adaptive flexibility exemplifies evolution's cumulative process. organisms are not simply molded by static conditions but are continuously responding to changing circumstances, integrating physiology, behavior, and intelligence to survive and thrive. Language, one of the defining features of humanity, amplified the evolutionary potential of cognition and sociality. Shared symbolic communication allowed the transmission of abstract ideas, strategies, and knowledge across generations. Cultural evolution, now decoupled from purely genetic inheritance, became a central driver of survival and adaptation. Skills, innovations, and social norms could spread rapidly, enhancing resilience and promoting group success. This capacity illustrates a pivotal shift in evolution. Humans could now influence the selective pressures acting upon them, shaping both their own development and the broader ecological context through learned behaviors and social structures. The development of culture, art, and ritual further exemplifies the complexity of human evolution. Symbolic expression allowed for identity formation, social cohesion, and shared meaning, creating structures that strengthened cooperation and collective action. Cultural practices influenced reproductive success, survival strategies, and social hierarchies. Unlike purely genetic traits, these behaviors could be transmitted rapidly and adapted to local conditions, illustrating a new dimension of evolutionary flexibility. Humans became both products and agents of evolution, capable of reflecting on their environment and modifying it in ways no other species could. Dietary expansion played a critical role in shaping human evolution. Early humans adapted to omnivorous diets, consuming plant matter, meat, and eventually cooked foods, allowing caloric demands to support growing brains and active lifestyles. Hunting and gathering required skill, strategy, and cooperation, reinforcing cognitive and social abilities. Resourcefulness in exploiting available foods created resilience in the face of environmental unpredictability, ensuring survival across diverse habitats. The interplay of diet, cognition, and social behavior highlights evolution's integrative nature, where multiple adaptations reinforce one another to create complex, adaptable organisms. The evolution of humans also reflects a profound interplay between vulnerability and resilience. Early humans were not the fastest, strongest, or most physically imposing species. Their success derived from a combination of intelligence, cooperation, tool use, and cultural transmission. These traits allowed them to navigate environmental uncertainty, outcompete other species, and transform ecosystems to their advantage. Life's trajectory demonstrates that survival is not determined solely by immediate power but by the capacity to integrate multiple adaptive strategies, anticipate challenges, and exploit opportunities across both physical and social landscapes. By the time Homo sapiens emerged, humans were capable of manipulating their environment, forming complex societies, and developing symbolic systems of communication and knowledge. The cumulative effects of millions of years of evolution, bipedalism, dexterous hands, large brains, social intelligence, cultural learning, and environmental awareness, culminated in a species uniquely equipped to shape its destiny. Humans became active participants in evolution, influencing ecosystems, species interactions, and even the selective pressures acting upon themselves. The story of humanity is therefore inseparable from the broader history of life. It is the latest chapter in a 4-billion-year narrative of adaptation, innovation, and survival. Ultimately, the emergence of humans exemplifies life's relentless drive to explore new possibilities, overcome constraints, and integrate multiple dimensions of adaptation. From physical structure to cognition, social behavior to cultural practice, humans embody the cumulative outcomes of environmental challenges, evolutionary experimentation, and the persistent interplay between opportunity and constraint. Life, through humans, has achieved a level of self-awareness and influence unparalleled in Earth's history. Yet this achievement is both a continuation and a reflection of the processes that have shaped all living organisms, survival, adaptation, and the ceaseless negotiation with an ever-changing planet. In reflecting on the emergence of humans, we see evolution in its most intricate and recursive form. Traits honed over millions of years converged to create a species capable of shaping its own environment, transmitting knowledge across generations, and reflecting on its own existence. Life has transformed from simple self-replicating molecules to organisms capable of conscious thought, creativity, and foresight. This trajectory demonstrates that evolution is not merely a process of survival, it is an ongoing, cumulative journey of innovation, adaptation, and complexity. Humans are both the product and agent of this process, a living testament to the enduring, creative power of life. The story of humans ultimately underscores a profound truth: evolution never stops. It operates across physical, cognitive, and cultural dimensions, responding to environmental change, social interaction, and opportunity. The emergence of Homo sapiens represents a new frontier, where adaptation is not only biological but cultural, technological, and intellectual. Yet despite our unique abilities, humans remain part of the broader tapestry of life, subject to the same forces of selection, adaptation, and environmental constraint that have guided all organisms for billions of years. Our story is one of continuity, connection, and the relentless, unfolding journey of life itself. The legacy of human evolution is both a reflection of life's past and a determinant of its future. By understanding the processes that shaped us, from bipedalism and tool use to cognition, culture, and social complexity, we gain insight into the broader narrative of life. We see that adaptation, resilience, and creativity are central to survival, that intelligence is both a product of and response to environmental and social pressures, and that life's trajectory is a continuous negotiation between constraint and opportunity. Humanity is the culmination of billions of years of evolution, yet it also marks a new chapter, where the capacity for self-awareness, innovation, and environmental manipulation introduces possibilities and responsibilities never before encountered in Earth's history. In conclusion, the emergence of humans represents the apex of a 4-billion-year evolutionary journey, integrating anatomical, physiological, cognitive, and social innovations into a species capable of shaping both its own destiny and the broader ecosystems it inhabits. From the earliest bipedal primates to culturally sophisticated Homo sapiens, evolution demonstrates the cumulative, relentless power of adaptation, innovation, and survival. The story of humanity is inseparable from the story of life itself. It is a testament to resilience, creativity, and the ceaseless, unending struggle to thrive in an ever-changing world. As life continues to evolve, humans stand as both participants and observers, reflecting on the past, shaping the present, and influencing the future, in a narrative that began long before our arrival and will continue long after, proving that evolution, indeed, never stops. As humans emerged on the evolutionary stage, they carried with them the cumulative legacy of 4 billion years of life's relentless experimentation. Each innovation, adaptation, and survival strategy developed by their predecessors, single-celled organisms, multicellular life, vertebrates, mammals, and primates, had laid the groundwork for what would become an unprecedented capacity for environmental influence and self-reflection. Humans did not merely inherit a physical body optimized for survival, they inherited cognition, culture, and the potential to understand the forces that shaped them. In this sense, the emergence of humanity was not a sudden event but the inevitable product of countless iterations of life navigating a complex, dynamic, and often hostile planet. One of the most profound aspects of human evolution is the development of complex language. Unlike the basic vocalizations of other primates, human language allows for abstract thought, the communication of ideas across time and space, and the transmission of knowledge with extraordinary fidelity. This ability fundamentally transformed survival strategies. Knowledge about hunting, gathering, shelter, and tool use could now be shared, refined, and accumulated across generations. Information, once confined to individual experience, became a communal asset. Language turned culture into an evolutionary force, creating a new dimension of inheritance that complemented and sometimes even surpassed genetic transmission in shaping behavior and opportunity. Alongside language, humans developed sophisticated tools and technology, extending the reach of their physical capabilities. Early stone tools provided mechanical advantage, allowing humans to access food, modify landscapes, and protect themselves from predators. Over millennia, tool use evolved from simple implements to complex machines, each innovation building upon previous knowledge. Unlike the instinct-driven behaviors of earlier organisms, technological evolution allowed humans to manipulate the environment in ways that no other species could. Life, through humans, began to actively shape planetary systems, illustrating the extraordinary cumulative power of intelligence, innovation, and foresight. Social structures also evolved in complexity unparalleled in other species. Humans organized into extended networks, creating hierarchies, alliances, and cooperative strategies that enabled survival in diverse and unpredictable environments. Cooperation became not just a strategy for hunting or defense but a mechanism for building societies capable of planning, resource management, and cultural continuity. Social cohesion, reinforced by shared norms, traditions, and institutions, magnified the evolutionary advantages of intelligence. Knowledge and behavior were no longer solely individual properties, they became embedded in collective structures, creating emergent properties that further enhanced survival and adaptation. The human capacity for abstract thought introduced a new layer to evolutionary dynamics. Humans can contemplate past events, predict future scenarios, and imagine alternatives that have not yet occurred. This capacity for reflection allows proactive rather than reactive adaptation. Life, through humans, gained the unprecedented ability to anticipate environmental changes, design strategies to mitigate risk, and manipulate outcomes in ways that other organisms could not. Cognition became a tool for shaping evolution itself, highlighting a profound transition from responding to the world to actively steering interactions with it. Environmental manipulation became a defining feature of human evolution. Humans did not merely adapt to existing conditions, they altered landscapes, controlled fire, cultivated plants, and domesticated animals. These innovations reshaped ecosystems, creating new niches while diminishing others. Unlike other organisms, which respond primarily to selective pressures, humans could generate their own pressures, both ecological and evolutionary. The consequences were profound: species extinction, habitat transformation, and climate alteration became part of the human influence on life's trajectory. Evolutionary outcomes were increasingly entwined with human action, introducing an element of intentionality into what had previously been a largely unconscious process. Cultural evolution accelerated the pace of change. Knowledge, transmitted through language, ritual, and practice, could be accumulated, refined, and transmitted independently of genetic change. This allowed humans to adapt to environmental challenges far more rapidly than species relying solely on biological evolution. Agriculture, toolmaking, and social governance are all examples of cultural innovations that reshaped the survival landscape. Cultural evolution created a parallel track to biological evolution, expanding the adaptive toolkit available to humans and transforming the selective pressures acting on both themselves and other species. The emergence of symbolic thought and art added yet another dimension. Humans began to interpret, represent, and manipulate their experiences through symbols, art, and storytelling. This capacity enhanced social cohesion, facilitated knowledge transfer, and strengthened group identity. Symbolic thought allowed humans to conceptualize morality, plan long-term strategies, and consider abstract concepts such as justice, time, and mortality. These cognitive abilities directly influenced survival by enabling cooperation, foresight, and decision-making beyond immediate self-interest. Intelligence, previously expressed through problem-solving and social strategy, now included reflection, abstraction, and imagination, tools capable of shaping both society and environment. The evolutionary consequences of human innovation extend beyond immediate survival. By altering ecosystems, domesticating species, and exploiting natural resources, humans have created selective pressures on countless organisms. Domesticated plants and animals have undergone accelerated evolution under human influence, while wild species face extinction or Adaptation in response to habitat transformation. Humans have become an ecological force, driving evolution on scales previously occupied by natural events such as climate shifts or mass extinctions. Life, in a sense, has become self-aware, capable of modifying its own evolutionary trajectory through conscious action. Humans also demonstrate a unique capacity for learning from history. Whereas earlier organisms respond primarily to environmental feedback over generations, humans can internalize lessons, transmit knowledge, and anticipate consequences without waiting for natural selection to operate. This metacognitive ability creates a form of adaptive plasticity unmatched in the history of life. Life, through humans, has evolved the capacity for foresight, reflection, and strategic planning at a planetary scale. Evolution has transcended its traditional confines, incorporating culture, cognition, and collective intelligence as drivers of adaptation. Ethical and philosophical considerations emerge naturally from this capacity. Humans are aware of their impact on other species and the planet itself, raising questions about responsibility, stewardship, and the future of life on Earth. Unlike previous evolutionary actors, humans can choose whether to preserve or destroy, conserve or exploit. This awareness does not negate natural selection but adds a novel layer, the possibility of intentional, reflective influence over evolution. Life has evolved not only to survive but to contemplate survival, extending the battle for existence into the realm of ethics, foresight, and conscious choice. At the same time, humans remain subject to evolutionary pressures. Disease, environmental change, and competition continue to shape survival, reminding us that intelligence and culture are extensions of, not replacements for, the fundamental laws of life. Evolution is ongoing, and humans are participants in a dynamic process that has persisted for billions of years. Our capacity to influence the planet does not exempt us from natural constraints, it amplifies them, creating new challenges as well as new opportunities. Ultimately, the story of human emergence reflects the cumulative power of evolution over 4 billion years. From single-celled organisms adapting to chemical gradients, to vertebrates developing complex anatomy, to mammals innovating behavior and social structures, and finally to humans wielding intelligence, culture, and technology, life demonstrates a relentless drive to survive, adapt, and explore new possibilities. Humans represent not a culmination but a continuation, an ongoing chapter in the story of life, capable of both profound creation and profound destruction. The evolutionary journey continues, with humans as both participants and stewards, navigating the complex interplay of biology, culture, and environment, shaping the future trajectory of life on Earth. In reflecting on this journey, it becomes clear that evolution never stops. Life is a continuous process of adaptation, innovation, and transformation. Humans, with their unique cognitive and cultural capacities, exemplify both the potential and the responsibility inherent in this process. Our species is a product of countless generations of trial, error, and adaptation, and our actions now influence the survival and evolution of countless other species. The 4-billion-year struggle for survival continues, transformed by consciousness, culture, and choice, yet fundamentally connected to the same forces that shaped the earliest life on Earth. Evolution is both relentless and creative, and as humans, we are participants in an unbroken chain of life's extraordinary, ongoing battle to survive, adapt, and thrive.